I'll bet you my entire company you can't beat me in a race." The words hung in the air like a detonation. Victor Langdon, CEO of Langdon Automotive, stood in the executive parking lot with his arms crossed, his Italian leather shoes gleaming under the late afternoon sun. Before him stood Samuel Reed, 73 years old, wearing navy blue janitor's coveralls with his name stitched above the pocket. Between them sat two cars, Victor's $300,000 red Ferrari and Samuel's 1967 Chevrolet Impala, its once proud body now scarred by rust and time. What started as casual mockery had escalated into something far more dangerous. Phones were already raised, cameras were rolling. The crowd of employees initially laughing at Victor's cruel joke now stood silent, sensing they were witnessing something that couldn't be undone. Samuel didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply looked Victor in the eye and said one word. "Okay." That acceptance, calm, final, unshakable, sent a chill through the crowd that Victor's insult never could. Before we dive into what happened next, I invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoy it, please like this video and comment with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this journey travels. The trouble began 3 weeks earlier, though no one recognized it as trouble at the time. Samuel Reed had worked at Langdon Automotive for 42 years. He started when the company occupied a single warehouse on the edge of Detroit, back when Victor's father, Thomas Langdon, ran operations from a cluttered desk in the corner of the shop floor. Samuel had been hired to sweep floors and empty trash bins, a job he performed with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else in his life. Over the decades, the company transformed. Thomas Langdon's honest craftsmanship and fair dealing built a reputation that attracted investors. The warehouse became a campus. The single assembly line multiplied into 12. Langdon Automotive evolved from a regional parts supplier into a luxury performance vehicle manufacturer, producing some of the most sought-after sports cars in North America. Through it all, Samuel remained. He watched the company grow around him like a tree adding rings, each expansion creating new departments, new executives, new layers of hierarchy that pushed men like him further into invisibility. He knew every hallway, every storage closet, every temperamental lock and faulty light fixture. Employees came and went, bright young engineers, ambitious managers, rotating shifts of assembly workers. But Samuel endured, a fixture as permanent as the building itself. When Thomas Langdon died 5 years ago, his son Victor inherited everything. The transition happened smoothly on paper: stock transfers, board approvals, press releases celebrating continuity and vision. But those who had known both men recognized immediately that something fundamental had changed. Thomas had walked the factory floor every morning, greeting workers by name, asking about their families, listening to their concerns about equipment or safety. Victor walked the executive suite, his attention fixed on quarterly reports, market projections, and the opinions of Wall Street analysts who had never touched a wrench or tightened a bolt. Thomas drove the cars his company built, testing them personally, feeling for problems in the steering or hearing irregularities in the engine. Victor collected exotic automobiles manufactured by competitors: Ferraris, Lamborghinis, McLarens, vehicles he showcased at charity galas and exclusive events, symbols of wealth rather than expressions of his company's capabilities. The employees noticed. The shift in culture was gradual but unmistakable. Benefits packages were restructured. The annual company picnic became a modest lunch in the cafeteria. The suggestion box that Thomas had checked personally each week was removed, replaced by an anonymous online portal that generated automated responses. The pension plan Thomas had fought to maintain was converted to a 401k match that the company reserved the right to suspend during economic uncertainties. Samuel noticed too, though he rarely spoke about it. He had learned long ago that men in his position survived by being useful and unremarkable, by doing their work well and avoiding conflicts they couldn't win. He arrived each morning at 5:30, changed into his coveralls in the small locker room near the loading docks, and began his rounds with the efficiency born of decades of repetition. He cleaned executive offices before the executives arrived, emptying wastebaskets filled with discarded reports and half-eaten lunches, wiping down conference tables where decisions affecting hundreds of lives were made by people who would never know his name. He restocked bathrooms, replaced burned-out light bulbs, swept hallways, and performed countless small maintenance tasks that kept the facility running smoothly. His work was invisible by design. When done properly, no one noticed. The building simply functioned, clean and maintained, as if by magic. But Samuel possessed knowledge that extended far beyond janitorial duties. During those early years when the company was small and every hand was needed, he had worked alongside mechanics and fabricators, learning the intricacies of automotive systems. Thomas Langdon had encouraged cross-training, believing that understanding how the pieces fit together made everyone more valuable. Samuel had paid attention. During lunch breaks and slow periods, he studied engine diagrams, watched master mechanics diagnose problems, asked questions that revealed a natural aptitude for mechanical systems. He learned to read the language of machines, the subtle variations in sound that indicated worn bearings, the smell of failing electrical components, the vibrations that suggested misalignment or imbalance. Thomas had recognized this talent. Several times over the years, he had offered Samuel positions in the shop, opportunities to transition from maintenance to skilled mechanical work. But Samuel had declined, and his reasons were complex, woven from threads of caution, realism, and a clear-eyed understanding of how the world worked for men who looked like him. He had seen talented black workers promoted into positions where they became targets, blamed for problems they didn't create, held to standards that shifted whenever they approached success. He had watched the careful resentment that built among some white workers when black colleagues advanced, the subtle sabotage disguised as mistakes or miscommunication. He had learned that visibility came with costs, and that sometimes survival meant choosing modest security over ambitious risk. So he remained a janitor, known and trusted, performing his duties with quiet excellence while keeping his deeper knowledge to himself. But he never stopped learning. In the early mornings before other employees arrived, he often walked through the prototype workshop, observing the latest designs, noting the innovations and modifications. He read technical manuals left in conference rooms, studied engineering specifications that others discarded. His curiosity was genuine and disciplined, a private education that continued year after year, known only to himself. The vintage Chevrolet Impala in the parking lot was the product of that hidden expertise. Samuel had purchased the car 40 years ago, back when it was simply a used vehicle, affordable and reliable. Over the decades, he had restored it piece by piece, teaching himself advanced mechanical skills through the practical challenges of resurrection. The engine had been completely rebuilt, not once, but 3 times, each iteration incorporating improvements Samuel designed himself. He had modified the suspension for better handling, upgraded the braking system with modern components adapted to the classic framework, rewired the electrical system with painstaking precision. The body showed its age, rust spreading across the quarter panels and doors, paint faded to a dull ghost of its original color. But beneath that worn exterior lived a machine of remarkable capability, a testament to knowledge applied with patience and care. Samuel had no interest in showing off his work. The car was transportation, a reliable companion that started every morning and carried him safely home each evening. That it possessed performance capabilities far beyond its appearance was simply a private satisfaction, a secret between him and the machine. Victor Langdon knew nothing of this history. To him, Samuel was merely part of the scenery, a forgettable figure whose purpose was maintaining the environment in which important people conducted important business. In 5 years as CEO, Victor had never spoken directly to Samuel, never acknowledged his presence beyond the occasional impatient gesture when he needed a conference room cleaned quickly or a spill addressed immediately. This indifference might have continued indefinitely, 2 men occupying the same space without meaningful intersection, if not for the afternoon of March 15th. Victor had scheduled a promotional event in the main parking lot, a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to generate social media buzz for Langdon Automotive's latest release, the Apex GT, a limited edition supercar priced at $285,000. The company had manufactured only 50 units, each already sold to wealthy collectors and automotive enthusiasts before production even began. The event was pure Victor, heavy on flash, light on substance. He had arranged for local influencers and automotive journalists to attend, offering them brief test drives and photo opportunities. A professional videographer circulated through the crowd, capturing content for the company's YouTube channel and Instagram feed. Catering tables offered champagne and artisanal appetizers. A DJ played electronic music at a volume that made conversation difficult. Victor stood at the center of it all, wearing sunglasses that cost more than most employees earned in a week, holding court with journalists and social media personalities who hung on his proclamations about performance metrics and luxury branding. The Apex GT represents the pinnacle of American automotive engineering, he declared, his voice carrying across the parking lot. 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, top speed of 215 miles per hour. This isn't just a car. It's a statement about refusing to accept limitations. The journalists nodded, scribbling notes and recording video on their phones. The influencers posed beside the vehicle, angling for the best light, already composing captions about exclusive access and luxury lifestyle. Samuel was working the event peripherally, emptying trash receptacles that were filling with discarded champagne flutes and half-eaten canapes, wiping down tables, ensuring the restrooms remained clean for the guests. He moved quietly through the crowd, professionally invisible, doing his job while the celebration continued around him. He was carrying a bag of trash toward the dumpsters when he passed through the section of parking lot where employees left their personal vehicles. His Impala sat in its usual spot, the rust and faded paint making it look like a relic from another era, completely out of place among the late-model SUVs and sedans that surrounded it. Victor noticed him at the same moment. The CEO had been walking back from a test drive, still animated from the experience of the Apex GT's acceleration, still performing for the cameras that followed him everywhere. His gaze swept across the employee parking area and landed on Samuel, then shifted to the Impala. He stopped walking. His expression changed from performative enthusiasm to something sharper, more predatory. He had found an opportunity for entertainment, a chance to demonstrate his wit and dominance before an audience already primed to laugh at his jokes and amplify his moments. "Hey!" Victor called out, his voice loud enough to cut through the music and conversations. "Hey, old man!" Samuel turned slowly, the trash bag still in his hand, his expression neutral. He recognized the tone, casual cruelty disguised as humor, the kind of interaction that could go nowhere good for someone in his position. Victor walked toward him, the crowd following like a wake behind a boat. The cameras came too, sensing that something interesting was developing. The influencers raised their phones, always ready to capture content. "Is that your car?" Victor asked, gesturing toward the Impala with the kind of exaggerated disbelief that invited others to share his amusement. "Yes, sir," Samuel replied quietly. His posture remained relaxed but alert, the bearing of a man who had weathered storms before and knew how to protect himself through stillness and careful words. Victor circled the Impala slowly, performing an inspection for his audience. He ran his finger along the rust-pocked hood, examined the faded paint, peered through the windows at the worn interior. His commentary came in a running stream, each observation delivered with theatrical disgust. "This thing is a disaster. Look at this rust. The whole quarter panel is basically Swiss cheese. And this interior," he opened the driver's door, wrinkling his nose, "smells like a nursing home. How is this even street legal?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous at first, then growing bolder as people realized Victor was playing to them, inviting their participation in the mockery. Samuel said nothing. He stood holding the trash bag, waiting for the moment to pass, hoping Victor would lose interest and return to his expensive toys and admirers. But Victor was enjoying himself too much. The attention energized him, the laughter validating his performance. He leaned against the Impala's hood, the metal creaking under his weight, and addressed Samuel with the kind of condescending friendliness that was somehow worse than open hostility. "How old are you, man? 70? 75? And you're still driving this heap? You've worked here for what, 100 years? And this is the best you can do?" "I've worked here 42 years, sir," Samuel said evenly. "The car runs fine. Gets me where I need to go." "Gets you where you need to go," Victor repeated, mimicking Samuel's tone to the delight of his audience. "That's what we're all about, right? Just getting by. Just doing the minimum. No wonder you're still cleaning toilets after 4 decades." The cruelty was casual, reflexive, the kind of comment Victor made without thinking because he had never experienced consequences for his words. In his world, power insulated him from accountability. Money meant never having to apologize or reconsider. Status gave him permission to treat others as props in his performance. Samuel felt something shift inside him, a temperature change in his chest that had nothing to do with anger or wounded pride. It was recognition. The moment when you understand that a line has been crossed, that remaining silent will cost you something important, something that can't be measured in job security or financial stability. The car has more to it than what shows on the outside, he said quietly. Victor's eyebrows rose. Oh, really? What, does it have a 6 sound system? Fuzzy dice that really tie the whole disaster together? More laughter. Phones captured every moment. This was content gold, the powerful CEO roasting an employee, the kind of edgy humor that generated engagement and shares. It has a good engine, Samuel said. Rebuilt it myself. Runs strong. You rebuilt it yourself, Victor repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. You're a janitor who rebuilt an engine. Sure, and I bet it's faster than my Ferrari too, right? The question hung in the air for a moment, half serious, half mocking. Samuel could have deflected it, could have laughed it off, could have retreated into the protective invisibility that had served him for decades. Instead, he met Victor's eyes and said, "Might be." The parking lot went quiet. Even the DJ seemed to sense the change, the music fading to a lower volume. Victor's expression shifted from amusement to something harder, more alert. He pushed off from the Impala's hood, standing straight. "Might be," he repeated slowly. "You think this rust bucket might be faster than my Ferrari?" "Didn't say faster," Samuel clarified. "Said it might be. I don't know what you drive, but my car runs strong." Victor laughed, but the sound carried an edge now, something defensive beneath the performance. His audience was watching him differently, waiting to see how he would respond to this unexpected challenge from an old man who should know his place. "You want to find out?" Victor asked. "You want to actually test that theory?" Samuel should have backed down, should have smiled and shook his head, played the humble janitor who was just joking around, diffused the situation before it escalated into something dangerous. Every instinct built from decades of navigating workplace hierarchies told him to retreat. But something else spoke louder, a lifetime of swallowed responses, of smiling at disrespect, of accepting casual cruelty as the price of employment, something that had been compressed for so long that it had become dense and heavy, a weight he was tired of carrying. "Sure," he said. "We can test it." Victor's smile became sharp and predatory. This was better than he could have hoped for. Not just mockery, but an actual contest, a narrative he could shape and control, content that would generate genuine engagement. "Okay," he said, his voice rising to address the crowd. "Okay, this is happening. Old man here thinks his junk heap can compete with a Ferrari. So, let's make it interesting." He paused for effect, letting the anticipation build. The cameras pressed closer. The crowd formed a tighter circle. Everyone understood they were witnessing something unusual, something that would be replayed and shared and discussed. "We'll race," Victor announced, "right here, right now, from here to the front gate and back. Simple, clean. And when I win, which we all know I will, you have to admit on camera, in front of everyone, that you were wrong, that your car is trash, that you're just an old man who doesn't know what he's talking about." He paused again, and his smile widened. "But if you win, if by some miracle that rolling disaster somehow beats my Ferrari, I'll give you my company. Langdon Automotive, the whole thing, yours. How's that for stakes?" The crowd erupted. Gasps, laughter, excited chatter. Phones rose higher, everyone wanting to capture this moment. The journalists were already composing headlines in their minds. The influencers saw viral gold. Samuel stood motionless, the trash bag still in his hand, processing what had just happened. Victor had escalated a simple conversation into something enormous, something public and permanent. There was no backing down now, not without humiliation, not with dozens of cameras recording his response. "Okay," he said again, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet parking lot. "We'll race." Victor clapped his hands together, delighted. "Fantastic! This is fantastic! Somebody mark out the course. Let's do this properly." The next 20 minutes became a blur of activity. Employees who had been working inside emerged, drawn by rumors spreading through the building. The DJ abandoned his equipment, wanting to watch. Security guards came out to manage the growing crowd. People began filming from multiple angles, some posting live streams to social media, others texting friends to come watch. Someone spray-painted a starting line on the asphalt. The course was established, from the employee parking lot to the front gate, approximately a quarter mile, around the decorative fountain that marked the entrance, and back to the starting position. Simple enough to be fair, long enough to test actual performance. Victor was in his element, playing to the crowd, revving the Ferrari's engine to thunderous roars of approval. The car was beautiful, gleaming red paint reflecting the afternoon sun, aggressive lines suggesting speed even while standing still. He had removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, adopting the pose of a serious competitor rather than a CEO playing games. Samuel walked to his Impala without fanfare. He set down the trash bag carefully, as if it mattered, as if he planned to pick it back up afterward and resume his duties. He unlocked the driver's door. The lock was temperamental, requiring a specific angle and pressure, and slid into the worn seat. The interior was exactly as Victor had described, old, worn, showing decades of use. The upholstery was cracked, repaired in places with duct tape. The dashboard was faded. The radio was original equipment from 1967, long since non-functional. Everything showed its age. Everything except the instrument cluster, which Samuel had modified extensively. Modern gauges tracked oil pressure, temperature, RPMs with precision. A small toggle switch near the steering column controlled modifications that weren't visible from outside. He turned the key. The engine caught immediately, settling into a smooth idle that hinted at the power lurking beneath the hood. Samuel sat quietly, hands on the wheel, breathing steadily, centering himself. Through the windshield, he could see Victor performing for the cameras, making exaggerated gestures, laughing with the crowd. This was entertainment for him, a story he would tell at parties, the day he raced his janitor and taught him a lesson about knowing his place. Samuel had no illusions about what this race represented. Win or lose, his life was about to change. Victor would not forget this challenge, would not forgive the audacity of an employee, a black employee, a janitor, daring to compete with him publicly. Whether the Impala won or lost, Samuel's time at Langdon Automotive was probably finished, but he had made his choice. For once, he would not be invisible. For once, he would show what he was capable of, regardless of consequence. An employee had been designated as starter, a young woman from accounting who looked terrified to be at the center of attention. She stood between the two vehicles, raising her hand, counting down with her fingers. 3. Victor revved the Ferrari again, the engine screaming, the sound designed to intimidate and impress. 2. Samuel breathed slowly, his foot light on the accelerator, feeling the Impala's readiness. 1. The parking lot held its breath. The starter's hand dropped. Victor's Ferrari exploded forward, tires screaming, acceleration brutal and immediate. The crowd roared. The car was a red blur, covering the first 100 yards in seconds, the gap between it and the Impala widening dramatically. Samuel's start was more measured, the Impala accelerating smoothly, but not dramatically. To the watching crowd, it looked like the race was already over, the outcome exactly as predicted. Laughter began spreading through the spectators, people shaking their heads at the old man's foolishness. But Samuel wasn't trying to match Victor's explosive start. He was driving strategically, letting the Ferrari's driver burn through his advantages in the early sprint, waiting for the moment when raw power would matter less than control and knowledge. The fountain marked the turnaround point. Victor took it wide and fast, the Ferrari's performance tires gripping asphalt, the car cornering with the brutal efficiency of modern engineering. He emerged from the turn still accelerating, heading back toward the finish line, victory certain. Samuel approached the fountain differently. He had driven these parking lots for 42 years, knew every slope and irregularity, understood exactly where the asphalt was smoothest and where it had settled unevenly. He took a tighter line, carrying more speed through the turn than seemed wise, the Impala's modified suspension handling loads it was never designed for. As he came out of the turn, he reached for the small toggle switch and flipped it upward. The Impala's engine note changed, deepening, becoming aggressive. The modifications Samuel had installed over years of careful work activated. A custom fuel management system, modified ignition timing, enhanced airflow. The car surged forward, acceleration building, the gap beginning to close. Victor saw it in his mirrors. The Impala, which should have been fading into insignificance behind him, was growing larger, catching up. Impossible. The Ferrari had superior power, superior aerodynamics, superior everything. An old Chevrolet driven by an old man couldn't possibly, but it was. The crowd's laughter died. Confusion replaced it, then disbelief, then excited shouting. Phones captured the Impala's surge, the narrowing gap, the moment when the underdog suddenly became competitive. Victor pressed the accelerator harder, demanding more from the Ferrari, but he was already at the edge of the car's capabilities on this short course. The Impala continued closing, Samuel driving with the precision of someone who knew his vehicle intimately, who had spent thousands of hours understanding its capabilities and limitations. They approached the finish line side by side. The Ferrari and the Impala, the new and the old, the master and the servant. $50,000 of Italian engineering next to decades of patient knowledge applied to American steel. And then, 50 yards from the finish line, the Ferrari's engine made a sound it should never make, a grinding, catastrophic noise that spoke of something fundamental failing. Victor's expression shifted from competitive focus to alarm. The Ferrari's acceleration died. Warning lights illuminated across the dashboard. The car began losing speed rapidly, momentum bleeding away as the engine seized. Samuel saw it happening, saw the Ferrari faltering, saw Victor's face through the window, registering shock and disbelief. The Impala pulled ahead, crossing the finish line first while the Ferrari coasted to a stop 30 yards short, smoke beginning to rise from under its hood. The parking lot erupted in chaos. Shouts, screams, laughter, confusion. People ran toward the finish line, phones raised, capturing the impossible outcome. The journalists surged forward, already composing stories in their minds. The influencers were delirious with joy. This was content beyond their wildest hopes. Samuel crossed the finish line and continued driving, bringing the Impala to a gentle stop near his original parking spot. He turned off the engine, flipped the toggle switch back to its normal position, and sat quietly for a moment, letting his heartbeat slow. Through the windshield, he could see the crowd surrounding Victor's Ferrari, people gesturing at the smoke, at Victor who had climbed out and was standing beside his failed machine, his expression stunned. Samuel opened his door and stepped out. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He walked back toward the finish line, toward the crowd and cameras and chaos, his coveralls still smudged with dust from his earlier work. The crowd parted for him, people stepping back, creating a corridor. Phones tracked his movement. Everyone wanted to capture what would happen next, wanted to see the janitor claim his prize, wanted to witness the moment when power inverted and the underdog became the victor. Samuel stopped a few feet from Victor. The CEO looked smaller somehow, diminished by his failure, by the public nature of his defeat. The arrogance had drained from his expression, replaced by something between shock and a dawning understanding that he had made a terrible mistake. Victor started, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. Around him the crowd was chanting, demanding he honor his bet, insisting he hand over his company as promised. Samuel looked at him steadily, and when he spoke his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried across the parking lot in the sudden silence. "I don't want your company, Mr. Langdon." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Victor's eyes widened slightly, not understanding. "You made a bet," Samuel continued. "You made it public. You put your company on the line thinking there was no risk, thinking you couldn't lose to someone like me. That was your choice. But I don't want your company. Never did. I just wanted to show you something." He paused, letting the moment settle. "I wanted to show you that the people you don't see, the people you dismiss, the people you treat like furniture, we're here, we have skills, we have knowledge, we have dignity, and sometimes we have engines you can't imagine." He turned and walked back toward his Impala, leaving Victor standing alone beside his smoking Ferrari, surrounded by cameras and a crowd that no longer knew whether to laugh or applaud, or simply process what they had witnessed. Samuel picked up the trash bag he had set down earlier. He had work to finish. The event would generate garbage that needed collecting, surfaces that needed cleaning. His job hadn't changed just because he had won a race, but as he walked away, he knew that everything else had. The crowd didn't disperse. If anything, it grew larger as word spread through the facility and beyond. Videos were already going viral: the shocking race, the impossible outcome, the quiet dignity of Samuel's response. Within an hour, the footage had been shared thousands of times. Within 3 hours, major news outlets were running the story. By evening, it had become a phenomenon, discussed on talk shows and news programs, analyzed and celebrated and debated. Samuel completed his shift as usual, emptying trash, cleaning bathrooms, restocking supplies. But he was no longer invisible. Employees stopped him constantly, wanting to shake his hand, to congratulate him, to hear him tell the story in his own words. He was polite but brief with each interaction, uncomfortable with the attention, wanting to simply finish his work and go home. In his office, Victor Langdon sat in darkness, ignoring the calls flooding his phone, avoiding the messages from board members and investors and journalists. The Ferrari sat in the parking lot surrounded by spectators and cameras, a monument to hubris and failed performance. He had lost more than a race. He had lost credibility, authority, the unquestioned assumption of superiority that had insulated him from accountability. And he had lost it to a man he had never bothered to know, had never considered worth knowing. The humiliation was complete and public and permanent, captured from dozens of angles, preserved forever in digital form, ready to be replayed and referenced and remembered. And somewhere in that darkness, Victor Langdon began to understand that what happened next would determine everything, whether he would learn from this moment or be destroyed by it, whether he would grow or calcify, whether he could become something better than the man who had stood in a parking lot and mocked an elderly janitor for driving an old car. But those decisions would come later. For now, in the gathering darkness, he simply sat alone with his failure, while outside, the celebration of an unexpected victory continued into the night. The morning after the race arrived with an intensity Samuel hadn't anticipated. He woke at 4:30 as always, his body trained by decades of routine to rise before dawn. The small house he had lived in for 38 years sat quiet around him. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances that had outlasted their warranties by years. His wife Marie had passed 7 years ago, and their daughter Jessica lived in Portland with her own family now. The silence was familiar, comfortable, but today felt different. His phone, which he normally checked once in the morning and once at night, showed 47 missed calls and hundreds of text messages. The race had been less than 12 hours ago, yet the digital footprint had grown exponentially overnight. He scrolled through messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, distant cousins and old friends and former neighbors, all wanting to congratulate him, to claim some connection to his unexpected moment of visibility. Samuel set the phone down without responding to any of them. He made coffee, ate toast with butter, dressed in his clean coveralls that he had washed and pressed the night before. The routine steadied him, reminded him that regardless of what had happened in that parking lot, he was still himself, still had a job to do, still had responsibilities that predated viral videos and public spectacle. The drive to Langdon Automotive took 20 minutes through streets still dark and mostly empty. The Impala ran smoothly, its engine settled back into normal operating parameters after yesterday's performance. Samuel had checked it thoroughly after returning home, looking for any stress or damage from the race, but the car had handled everything well. Decades of careful maintenance and modification had built something reliable, something that could be pushed hard without breaking. He pulled into the employee parking lot just before 6 o'clock and immediately noticed the difference. News vans occupied spaces near the entrance, their satellite equipment extended, crews setting up cameras and lights. Security guards he didn't recognize stood near the main doors, clearly brought in to manage the situation. A cluster of people waited near the building, journalists, he assumed, or perhaps more social media personalities hoping to capture follow-up content. Samuel parked in his usual spot, the same space he had occupied for years, and sat for a moment considering his options. He could turn around, drive home, call in sick. But that felt like running, like giving up the dignity he had claimed yesterday by speaking truth and demonstrating capability. He opened the car door and stepped out. The response was immediate. Cameras turned toward him. People began moving in his direction, calling his name, shouting questions that overlapped into incomprehensible noise. The security guards intercepted them, creating a barrier, but the attention was overwhelming, disorienting. Mr. Reed, how does it feel to beat your boss? Samuel, did you know your video has 12 million views? Mr. Reed, will you accept ownership of the company? Samuel, what's your message to working-class Americans? He kept walking, head down, moving toward the employee entrance with steady purpose. One of the security guards, a younger man Samuel recognized from occasional interactions, fell into step beside him, providing escort through the chaos. "Crazy morning, Mr. Reed," the guard said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Everybody wants a piece of you." "Just want to do my job," Samuel replied quietly. "Yeah, well, not sure that's going to be simple today. Mr. Langdon called an emergency board meeting for 8 o'clock. Word is they're deciding what to do about yesterday." Samuel nodded but didn't respond. He reached the employee entrance, badged in, and escaped into the relative quiet of the building's interior. The security guard stayed outside, returning to crowd management duties. The hallways were familiar territory, but they felt different now. Employees arriving for early shifts stopped and stared, some offering congratulations, others simply watching with expressions Samuel couldn't quite read. Respect mixed with something like nervousness, as if his sudden visibility had disrupted an unspoken social order that kept everyone in their designated places. He made his way to the small janitorial office near the loading docks, a windowless room containing cleaning supplies, equipment, and a desk where Samuel organized his daily tasks. His supervisor, Carl Morrison, was already there, sitting at the desk with his arms crossed, his expression tight. Carl was 52, had worked at Langdon Automotive for 18 years in various maintenance and facilities roles, and had been Samuel's direct supervisor for the past 6. Their relationship had always been professional but distant. Carl issued work orders, Samuel completed them, and neither man invested much energy in developing anything deeper. "Samuel," Carl said, his tone careful, "we need to talk." Samuel began loading his cleaning cart with supplies, moving through the familiar routine. "About what?" "About yesterday. About what you did." "I did my job yesterday," Samuel said evenly. "Cleaned up after the event, emptied trash, maintained the facilities. You know what I'm talking about. The race, the bet, the whole circus that's happening outside right now." Samuel paused, meeting Carl's eyes directly. "Mr. Langdon made a bet. I accepted it. I won. That's what happened." Carl stood up, agitation breaking through his careful tone. "You embarrassed him. You embarrassed the company. There are reporters outside, Samuel. News vans. This is a disaster for our reputation." "I didn't embarrass anyone," Samuel said quietly. "I drove my car, Mr. Langdon's Ferrari broke down. Those are just facts. Facts that are now all over the internet, making us look like fools, making him look like a fool." Carl ran his hand through his hair, clearly stressed. "The board is meeting this morning. They're talking about damage control, about how to handle this situation. Your name is coming up a lot." "My name's been on my coveralls for 42 years, Samuel said. "Nobody seemed to care before." "That was before you made the CEO look like an idiot in front of the world." The words hung in the small office, their implication clear. Samuel had violated an invisible rule, had disrupted the hierarchy that kept the organization functioning, had challenged power in a way that couldn't be ignored or forgiven. "I'm going to start my rounds," Samuel said, turning toward the door with his cart. "They might fire you," Carl said to his back. "Board might decide that's the cleanest solution. Get rid of you. Make a statement about professionalism and workplace conduct. You thought about that?" Samuel paused at the doorway without turning around. "I've thought about a lot of things over the years, Carl. Thought about dignity, thought about respect, thought about what it means to let people treat you like you're invisible. Yesterday I stopped thinking and started doing. Whatever comes from that, I'll handle it." He pushed the cart into the hallway and began his rounds, leaving Carl alone in the office. The building felt strange as Samuel worked. Normal operations continued, engineers at their computers, assembly line workers at their stations, managers in their meetings, but underneath the routine hummed a current of awareness, everyone conscious of the previous day's events, everyone processing what it meant that a janitor had beaten the CEO in a public contest. Samuel cleaned conference rooms and found people whispering, conversations stopping when he entered, resuming in hushed tones after he left. He restocked bathrooms and noticed employees watching him with new attention, some nodding respectfully, others looking uncomfortable, uncertain how to interact with someone whose status had suddenly become ambiguous. At 7:45, Samuel was cleaning the executive hallway when he saw Victor Langdon arrive. The CEO looked haggard, wearing sunglasses indoors, moving quickly toward his office without acknowledging anyone. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Jennifer, hurried alongside him carrying files and a tablet. "Mr. Langdon, the board is assembling in the main conference room. They're expecting you at 8. "I know when the meeting is, Jennifer," Victor snapped, his voice sharp with stress. "Just give me a minute." He disappeared into his office, the door closing with controlled force. Jennifer stood in the hallway looking overwhelmed, clutching her files like a shield. Samuel continued cleaning, wiping down the glass doors that lined the executive suite, invisible again in the way he had perfected over decades. Jennifer glanced at him, seemed about to speak, then thought better of it and hurried away. Through the glass, Samuel could see into Victor's office. The CEO stood at his window, looking out over the parking lot where yesterday's race had occurred, where his Ferrari still sat disabled and humiliated. Victor's posture spoke of defeat, of a man confronting consequences he hadn't imagined possible. At 8 o'clock precisely, the board members began arriving. Samuel recognized most of them, wealthy men in expensive suits, arriving in luxury vehicles, serving on the board primarily for prestige and networking, rather than any genuine involvement in the company's daily operations. They filed into the main conference room with serious expressions, aware that today's meeting would be different from their usual quarterly reviews of financial reports. Samuel had no intention of eavesdropping, but his work took him past the conference room several times over the next 2 hours. The door was thick and well insulated, but voices occasionally penetrated. Raised tones, arguments, the unmistakable sound of conflict. Around 10 o'clock, the conference room door opened and Victor emerged, his face flushed, his expression rigid with barely controlled anger. He walked past Samuel without seeing him, moving toward his office with stiff, mechanical steps. The board members followed more slowly, clustering in small groups, speaking in low tones. Samuel caught fragments of conversation as he emptied a nearby trash receptacle. Completely unacceptable behavior. Reputation damage is already significant. Need to make a decisive statement. One board member, an older man named Richard Caldwell, who had served alongside Victor's father Thomas, stopped near where Samuel was working. Richard had always been courteous in their occasional interactions, one of the few executives who made eye contact and offered basic pleasantness. "Samuel," Richard said quietly, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Samuel straightened, setting down the trash bag. "Yes, sir." Richard gestured toward an empty office, and Samuel followed him inside. The older man closed the door and turned to face him with an expression that mixed respect and concern. "What happened yesterday has created a complicated situation," Richard began. "I want you to understand that." "I understand that, Mr. Caldwell." "Victor made a foolish bet, a public bet, and he lost. Those are facts that can't be changed, but how we respond to those facts, that's what we're wrestling with now." Samuel waited, saying nothing. Richard continued, "Some board members want you terminated. They argue that you humiliated the CEO, damaged the company's reputation, created a spectacle that undermined authority and professionalism. They see your dismissal as necessary damage control." "And what do you think?" Samuel asked. "I think," Richard said slowly, "that Victor created this situation himself. I think he treated you with disrespect, made assumptions about your capabilities based on your position and age, and paid a price for his arrogance. I think firing you would compound his mistake rather than correct it." He paused, studying Samuel's face. "But I'm not the majority opinion on the board. Most of the others see this differently. They see organizational hierarchy being challenged. They see a worker who needs to be reminded of his place. They're scared, Samuel. Scared that if we don't reassert control, other employees might start questioning authority, might start pushing back against management decisions." "So I'm going to be fired," Samuel said quietly. "Not if I can help it, but I need you to understand the dynamics at play. The board is meeting again this afternoon. They're going to review company policies, examine your employment record, look for any justification for termination. They'll probably find something. After 42 years, everyone has something in their file that can be interpreted unfavorably if you're looking for reasons." "What should I do?" Richard considered the question carefully. "Continue doing your job. Don't talk to the media. Don't make this situation bigger than it already is. And understand that whatever happens in the next few days, you've already won something important. You stood up, you proved your capability, you challenged assumptions. Those things matter, regardless of the outcome. He extended his hand and Samuel shook it. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you, Samuel. Your father would have been proud. The comment surprised Samuel. You knew my father? Briefly, he worked here in the 50s, didn't he? Before the company was even called Langdon Automotive. I was just starting my career learning the business from my own father. I remember yours. Quiet man, good worker, treated people with respect. You have the same quality. Richard opened the door, ending the conversation. Samuel returned to his cart and continued his rounds, processing this new information, this unexpected connection to history he hadn't known existed. The afternoon brought no resolution. The board remained sequestered in meetings. Victor stayed in his office, refusing calls and visitors. The news crews outside grew larger as more media outlets picked up the story. Samuel's viral video continued spreading, spawning response videos and commentary pieces, becoming a cultural touchstone for discussions about workplace dignity, corporate arrogance, and the hidden capabilities of overlooked workers. Samuel worked through it all, maintaining his routine with deliberate consistency. He cleaned bathrooms, emptied trash, replaced light bulbs, performed all the small maintenance tasks that kept the facility functional. Coworkers continued approaching him with congratulations and questions, but he kept his responses brief and neutral, unwilling to feed the spectacle. At 3:30, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer, Victor's assistant. Mr. Reed, the board would like to speak with you. Could you come to the main conference room? Samuel's heart rate increased slightly, but his voice remained steady. I'll be right there. He stored his cleaning cart in the janitorial office, washed his hands, checked his appearance in the small mirror Carl kept near the desk. The coveralls were clean, properly pressed. His gray hair was neat. He looked exactly like what he was, a 73-year-old janitor about to face judgment from men who had never spent a day doing physical labor. The walk to the conference room felt longer than usual. Employees watched him pass, some offering encouraging nods, others looking away uncomfortably. When he reached the conference room, Jennifer was waiting outside, her expression sympathetic. They're ready for you, she said softly. Samuel entered the room. 9 board members sat around the long table, their expressions ranging from hostile to neutral to sympathetic. Victor sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the surface in front of him. Richard Caldwell occupied a seat near the middle, his posture relaxed but alert. An empty chair had been placed at the opposite end of the table from Victor. Samuel understood the symbolism, 2 men facing each other, power structures made visible through seating arrangements. Mr. Reed, please sit down, said Donald Patterson, the board chairman, a corpulent man in his 60s who had made his fortune in real estate and treated his board position as a hobby. Samuel sat, folding his hands in his lap, waiting. Donald cleared his throat officiously. Mr. Reed, we've asked you here to discuss yesterday's incident. I'm sure you're aware that your actions have created significant complications for this company. I accepted a bet that Mr. Langdon offered publicly, Samuel said evenly. I didn't create the situation. You participated in it, Donald countered. You could have declined. You could have diffused the situation. Instead, you chose to engage in a spectacle that has damaged this company's reputation and undermined executive authority. Well, I chose to demonstrate capability that was being dismissed, Samuel replied. Mr. Langdon assumed I was incompetent because of my position. I showed him otherwise. One of the other board members, a woman named Patricia Holbrook, who ran a consulting firm, leaned forward. And you felt that public humiliation was an appropriate response to perceived disrespect. I didn't humiliate anyone. I drove my car. Mr. Langdon's car broke down. I have no control over mechanical failures. Don't play games with us, Donald said sharply. You knew what you were doing. You knew beating him would create this exact situation. Samuel met his eyes directly. What I knew, Mr. Patterson, was that I had been disrespected in front of dozens of people. What I knew was that my car, which I built with my own hands over decades, was being mocked by someone who had never bothered to look beyond its exterior. What I knew was that I had a choice. accept that disrespect silently, as I've done countless times before, or stand up for myself. I chose to stand up. And in doing so, you violated the professional conduct policies outlined in your employment agreement, Donald said, sliding a document across the table. Section 4.2 specifically prohibits behavior that brings discredit to the company or undermines management authority. Samuel didn't reach for the document. Did Mr. Langdon violate those same policies when he publicly mocked my car and my capabilities? When he called me old man and suggested I was incompetent? When he made a bet involving company ownership without board approval? The question landed heavily. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Victor, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. This isn't about what I did. This is about your response, your decision to accept the bet, your willingness to participate in something that has now become a public relations disaster. Then fire me, Samuel said simply. If my behavior was so inappropriate, if I violated policies so severely, then terminate my employment, exercise your authority, do what you believe is necessary. The room went silent. The directness of Samuel's challenge had shifted the dynamic, forcing the board to confront their actual intentions rather than hiding behind procedural language. Richard Caldwell spoke for the first time. Before we make any decisions about Mr. Reed's employment, perhaps we should address the elephant in the room. Victor, your Ferrari failed during the race. Catastrophically. Publicly. A vehicle that costs $300,000, that represents the pinnacle of automotive engineering, suffered a complete mechanical breakdown during a simple acceleration test. Don't you think that's worth examining? Victor's face reddened. The car had a mechanical failure. That happens. Does it? Richard pressed. Because I've been doing some research since yesterday. The Ferrari 488 Pista has an exceptional reliability record. Total engine failures during normal operation are extremely rare. So rare that when it does happen, it typically indicates either severe manufacturing defect or improper maintenance. Either way, it raises questions. What are you suggesting? Victor demanded. I'm suggesting, Richard said calmly, that perhaps we should examine why your extremely expensive, supposedly superior vehicle failed so dramatically. And while we're examining that, perhaps we should also look at how you've been managing this company. Your father built Langdon Automotive on principles of quality, integrity, and respect for workers. Since you took over, we've seen declining employee satisfaction, increasing turnover, quality control issues, and now this, a CEO who publicly gambled company ownership on a race he couldn't win. The room erupted. Board members began talking over each other, some defending Victor, others agreeing with Richard's assessment. Donald Patterson tried to restore order, banging his hand on the table. Gentlemen, ladies, this is not productive. Actually, Richard said, rising to his feet, I think this is exactly what we need. This company has been drifting for 5 years. We've been so focused on stock prices and quarterly reports that we've forgotten what made Langdon Automotive successful in the first place. Craftsmanship, integrity, respect for the people who actually build our products. He turned to Samuel. Mr. Reed, how long did it take you to rebuild your car's engine? Samuel was surprised by the question. About 3 years, working evenings and weekends. And where did you learn engine mechanics? Here, working alongside your mechanics during my first years at the company. Mr. Thomas Langdon encouraged cross-training, believed everyone should understand how the pieces fit together. Richard nodded. My father believed the same thing. He and Thomas built this company on those principles. But somewhere along the way, we forgot them. We started seeing employees as resources rather than people. We started measuring success in dollars rather than quality. We started believing that titles and positions meant more than knowledge and capability. He gestured toward Samuel. This man has worked here for 42 years, 4 decades. He's seen this company evolve from a small shop to an international manufacturer. He's learned skills, developed expertise, contributed in ways that never appeared on any report or earned any recognition. And yesterday, when challenged, he demonstrated that the knowledge we've ignored is real and valuable. Patricia Holbrook spoke carefully. Richard, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that instead of firing Samuel Reed for having the audacity to defend his dignity, we examine our own failures as leadership. I'm proposing that we look at why our CEO felt comfortable publicly mocking an employee. I'm proposing that we investigate why Victor's Ferrari failed so spectacularly. And I'm proposing that we consider what it means for this company's future that we were all prepared to overlook decades of knowledge because it existed in someone wearing janitor's coveralls. The silence that followed was different from before. Not hostile or uncomfortable, but contemplative, each person processing the implications of Richard's words. Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. This is my company. No, Richard interrupted firmly. It's not your company. You're the CEO. You hold shares. But the company belongs to its shareholders, its workers, its customers. Your father understood that. He never confused position with ownership of people's dignity. Victor's face contorted with anger and something deeper, hurt, perhaps, or recognition of a truth he didn't want to accept. He looked around the table, seeing little support, understanding that the authority he had assumed was absolute had limitations after all. Fine, he said, his voice tight. Do whatever you want. Make your investigations. Question my leadership. But don't expect me to participate in this farce. He walked out, leaving the door open behind him, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Donald Patterson looked shaken. This meeting is getting out of control. We need to do our jobs, Richard said firmly. We need to govern this company properly, and that starts with making decisions based on what's right rather than what's comfortable. He looked at Samuel. Mr. Reed, you're not being terminated. Your employment is secure. More than that, I'm going to recommend to this board that we create a new position, something like workplace advisor or cultural consultant, someone who can help us reconnect with the principles that made this company successful, someone who understands both the history and the reality of working here. I'd like you to consider accepting that role. Samuel sat quietly for a long moment, processing the unexpected turn. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate the offer, but I'm a janitor. That's what I know, what I'm comfortable with. I don't need a new title or recognition. I just wanted to be seen as a person. That's all yesterday was about, being seen. You're being seen now, Patricia said quietly. The question is what we do with that visibility. Samuel nodded slowly. Then let me think about it. Let me finish my shift, go home, consider what this might mean. Can I do that? Of course, Richard said. Richard. Samuel stood, nodded to the board members, and left the conference room. The hallway was empty now, the drama concluded. Normal operations resumed. He retrieved his cleaning cart and continued his rounds, but his mind turned over Richard's proposal, examining it from multiple angles, considering implications and consequences. That evening, as the sun set and the building emptied, Samuel pushed his cart toward the janitorial office for the last time that day. The parking lot outside was finally clear of news vans and reporters, though he knew they would return tomorrow, and the day after, until the story lost its novelty and moved on to the next spectacle. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, calls, interview requests. Producers from morning shows, documentary filmmakers, publishers asking about book deals. The world wanted to package his moment, to monetize his dignity, to turn a simple act of self-respect into content and commerce. Samuel ignored it all. He punched out at exactly 5:30, walked to his Impala, and drove home through familiar streets, the same route he had traveled for decades, unchanged by viral fame or board meetings or the complicated politics of corporate power. But as he pulled into his driveway, he knew that something fundamental had shifted. The world had seen him now. The question was whether being seen would ultimately enhance his life or complicate it beyond recognition. Only time would reveal the answer, and Samuel had learned patience over 73 years of living, working, and building engines one piece at a time. The weeks that followed moved with the strange momentum of a boulder rolling downhill, slow at first, then gathering speed until stopping seemed impossible. Samuel's life, which had been defined by predictable routines and comfortable invisibility, transformed into something he barely recognized. The phone calls never stopped. The media requests multiplied. Every morning brought new interview proposals, speaking invitations, opportunities that promised money and attention in exchange for his story. He declined them all with the same quiet consistency he had brought to everything else in his life. "I'm not interested, thank you," became a phrase he repeated dozens of times daily, his voice polite but firm, offering no explanations or justifications. He had said what needed saying in that parking lot. The rest was just noise. But while Samuel tried to maintain normalcy, Langdon Automotive descended into crisis. The viral video had accomplished what years of employee complaints and safety concerns never could. It had forced public attention onto the company's internal culture, and what people saw when they looked closely was deeply troubling. Richard Caldwell had meant what he said about investigations. Within days of that contentious board meeting, he had commissioned a comprehensive external audit of company operations, bringing in consultants who specialized in organizational culture and workplace dynamics. The consultants arrived with clipboards and recording devices, conducting confidential interviews with employees at every level, examining policies and practices, reviewing complaints that had been filed and ignored over the past 5 years. What they discovered was systematic. Under Victor's leadership, Langdon Automotive had developed a culture where hierarchy was enforced through humiliation, where challenging management decisions invited retaliation, where workers learned to stay silent rather than report problems. The HR department had become a shield protecting executives rather than a resource supporting employees. Complaints about discrimination, safety violations, and hostile work environments were documented and then buried, filed away in folders that nobody with actual authority ever reviewed. The stories emerged slowly at first, employees tentative about speaking honestly, worried about consequences despite assurances of confidentiality. But Samuel's confrontation had created an opening, a permission structure that made others feel safe enough to share their own experiences. A black engineer who had been passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of less qualified white candidates. A woman in accounting who had endured sexual comments from her supervisor for 2 years, reporting them repeatedly with no action taken. Assembly line workers who had raised safety concerns about faulty equipment and been told to stop complaining or find employment elsewhere. The consultants documented everything, building a case file that grew thicker each day until the evidence became impossible to dismiss or rationalize as isolated incidents. This was pattern, practice, culture, embedded deep into the organization's functioning. Samuel heard about it secondhand through conversations with coworkers who were being interviewed, through the whispered speculation that filled the break room during shift changes. He continued his work as always, cleaning offices and restocking supplies, but the building felt different now, like a house where the foundation had cracked and everyone was waiting to see if the walls would hold. Victor had become a ghost in his own company. He arrived late, left early, spent his time barricaded in his office with the door closed and the blinds drawn. His assistant Jennifer fielded calls and emails with increasing desperation, making excuses, rescheduling meetings, trying to maintain the illusion that everything was under control while the structure collapsed around them. The Ferrari still sat in the parking lot, an abandoned monument to failed performance. Victor had called a towing company the day after the race, but before they arrived, Richard Caldwell had personally intervened, instructing security to prevent the car's removal. "That vehicle is evidence," he had told the board. "We need to understand what happened to it and why." A team of independent mechanics had been brought in to examine the engine. Their preliminary report landed on the board's desks 3 weeks after the race, and its contents were damning. The Ferrari's catastrophic failure hadn't been random or unavoidable. The engine had been improperly maintained, serviced by a luxury dealership that had cut corners and used substandard parts while charging premium prices. Oil changes had been performed incorrectly, filters replaced with cheaper alternatives, critical maintenance intervals ignored. But more troubling was what the mechanics found in the car's computer systems. The Ferrari had been modified to enhance its performance in ways that voided warranties and compromised reliability. Someone had reprogrammed the engine management system to produce more horsepower, had altered fuel mixture ratios, had disabled safety protocols designed to prevent catastrophic damage. The modifications were amateur work, the digital equivalent of a backyard mechanic with more ambition than skill. Victor had authorized the modifications himself, the mechanics confirmed, paying a performance shop to make his already fast car even faster, trading long-term reliability for short-term bragging rights. He had been driving a ticking time bomb, a vehicle compromised by his own vanity, waiting for the right conditions to fail spectacularly. When Richard shared the mechanics report with the full board, the response was swift and unanimous. An emergency meeting was called, and this time, Victor wasn't invited to defend himself. The board convened without him, discussed the findings, reviewed the organizational culture audit, and made a decision that had been building since the moment Samuel's Impala crossed that finish line. Victor Langdon was removed as CEO, effective immediately. The vote was 8-1, with only Donald Patterson dissenting, arguing weakly that the decision was too hasty, that Victor deserved another chance to correct course. But the others had seen enough, heard enough, understood that this wasn't about a single race or a failed engine. It was about fundamental failures of character and leadership that couldn't be fixed with second chances. The news broke on a Thursday morning. Samuel was cleaning the executive wing when Jennifer emerged from Victor's office, her face streaked with tears, carrying a cardboard box filled with personal items. She saw Samuel and stopped, unable to hold back the emotion. "They fired him," she said, her voice breaking. "The board just called and told him to leave. Security's coming to escort him out of the building." Samuel set down his cleaning supplies and approached her carefully. "I'm sorry, Jennifer. I know this is hard." "He's not a bad person," she said, trying to convince herself as much as Samuel. He made mistakes. He got caught up in trying to prove himself, trying to live up to his father's legacy. The pressure was enormous. "Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty," Samuel said gently. "Doesn't give anyone the right to treat people like they're less than human." Jennifer nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I saw how he talked to people sometimes, how he dismissed anyone who wasn't important enough. I should have said something. You're not responsible for his choices," Samuel interrupted. "You did your job. That's all anyone can ask." She looked at him with something like gratitude, then continued down the hallway, carrying the box that represented the end of Victor's tenure. 20 minutes later, security guards arrived at Victor's office. Samuel was nearby, emptying a recycling bin, invisible again in the way that allowed him to witness without being noticed. Victor emerged looking smaller than Samuel had ever seen him, his face pale, his movements mechanical. He had aged years in weeks, the confident swagger replaced by something broken and uncertain. The guards were professional but firm, escorting him through the building's corridors while employees watched from doorways and cubicles, witnessing the fall of someone who had seemed untouchable. Some faces showed satisfaction, others discomfort, many simple neutrality, the complicated response of people watching power redistribute itself, uncertain what it meant for their own positions. Victor's eyes swept across the watching faces and landed on Samuel. For a moment, the two men looked at each other across the distance of the hallway, across the gulf of class and race and consequence that had defined their relationship. Samuel saw recognition in Victor's expression, and something else. Not quite apology, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of awareness that he had created his own downfall through choices that seemed insignificant at the time. Then Victor looked away and continued walking, following the security guards toward the exit, toward whatever life awaited him outside the company his father had built and he had lost. After Victor left, the building felt different, lighter somehow, as if a pressure that nobody had consciously noticed was suddenly absent. People moved through the hallways differently, spoke more freely, made eye contact in ways they hadn't before. The change was subtle but unmistakable, the organization exhaling after holding its breath for years. The board appointed an interim CEO, bringing in Margaret Chen, a respected automotive executive who had built her reputation on turning around struggling companies through cultural transformation and operational excellence. She arrived the following Monday, a composed woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a direct manner that immediately distinguished her from Victor's performative leadership style. Her first action was addressing the entire company. Rather than sending an email or holding a formal press conference, she gathered employees in the main assembly area during shift change, when the maximum number of workers could attend without disrupting production. She stood on a small platform without notes or teleprompter, speaking plainly about what she had found and what she intended to do. "I've spent the past week reviewing the organizational culture audit," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "What I've learned has troubled me deeply. This company was built on principles of respect, quality, and integrity. Those principles were abandoned, and the result was a workplace where people felt afraid to speak honestly, unable to report problems, resigned to tolerating disrespect as the cost of employment. That ends today. She outlined specific changes: restructuring the HR department with new leadership, implementing transparent complaint procedures with independent oversight, establishing regular town halls where employees could raise concerns directly without fear of retaliation, reviewing all promotion and compensation decisions from the past 5 years to identify and correct discriminatory patterns. I know trust isn't rebuilt with announcements and policies, she continued. Trust is rebuilt through consistent action over time. I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to earn that trust. And I'm asking those of you who have been here long enough to remember what this company used to be, what it can be again, to help me understand what we've lost and how we can recover it. When she finished, the response was cautiously optimistic. Applause that started slow but grew stronger, people wanting to believe that change was possible while recognizing that promises were easy and follow-through was hard. After the meeting, Margaret did something unexpected. She asked to meet with Samuel. They sat in a small conference room, just the two of them, the door closed. Margaret had a cup of coffee and a notebook, her posture relaxed but attentive. "Mr. Reed, I want to start by thanking you," she said. "What you did, standing up for yourself in that parking lot, it created an opening for all of this. Without that moment, the problems here would have continued festering, and eventually this company would have destroyed itself from within." "I wasn't trying to save the company," Samuel said honestly. "I was just tired of being disrespected." "I understand, but sometimes individual acts of courage create consequences larger than their original intention. You didn't set out to transform this organization, but you did. The question now is what we do with that transformation." She opened her notebook, revealing pages of handwritten notes. "I've been reading through your employment file. 42 years here, perfect attendance record, 0 complaints, multiple commendations from supervisors over the years. You've been a model employee by every measurable standard." "I just did my job," Samuel said. "You did more than that. I've also been reading interviews from the culture audit. Your name comes up frequently. People talk about how you helped train new maintenance workers, how you volunteered to fix equipment when it broke down, how you shared your knowledge freely even though you weren't compensated for it. You've been teaching people for years, informally, quietly, without recognition." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "People ask questions. I answered them. Nothing special about that." "Actually, there is something special about it. It demonstrates exactly the kind of culture we need to rebuild here. People sharing knowledge, helping each other improve, seeing their colleagues as valuable rather than competition." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Richard Caldwell suggested creating a new position for you. You declined. I'd like to understand why." Samuel considered his response carefully. "I'm 73 years old, Ms. Chen. I'm comfortable with my work, with my routine. I don't need attention or recognition. I don't want to become some symbol or spokesperson. I just want to finish my career with dignity and maybe a little peace." "What if the position didn't require you to be a symbol? What if it was simply formalized what you've already been doing, teaching people, sharing knowledge, helping maintain the institutional memory that gets lost when we only value recent hires and advanced degrees?" "What exactly are you proposing?" Margaret flipped to a specific page in her notebook. "I'm proposing we create a mentorship program. Experienced workers paired with newer employees, formal knowledge transfer across departments and positions. You would coordinate it, help identify who should mentor whom, ensure the program actually serves its purpose rather than becoming another bureaucratic requirement that everyone ignores." "You want me to organize a mentorship program?" "I want you to help us remember what we've forgotten. Thomas Langdon built this company on the principle that everyone's knowledge matters, that titles matter less than capability, that respect flows in all directions. We need to recover that principle, and you understand it better than anyone because you've lived it." Samuel sat quietly, turning the proposal over in his mind. It was different from what Richard had suggested, less visible, more focused on practical contribution than symbolic recognition. It appealed to him in ways the cultural consultant role never could. "I'd need to keep doing my regular work too," he said finally. "The mentorship work would be in addition to, not instead of." Margaret smiled slightly. "Why?" You don't need to prove yourself as a janitor anymore, Mr. Reed. Everyone knows you're capable of more. It's not about proving anything. It's about doing work that matters, work that I'm good at, work that keeps the building running. I'm not ready to give that up just because people suddenly notice I exist. Fair enough. We can structure it however you're comfortable. Maybe start with a few hours a week dedicated to the mentorship program. See how it develops. Would that work? Samuel nodded slowly. I can try that. See if I'm actually any good at it beyond just answering questions when people ask. You'll be good at it, Margaret said with quiet confidence. The question isn't capability. It's whether you're willing to be visible in a new way, to step out of the background you've occupied for so long. She stood, extending her hand. Samuel rose and shook it, feeling the firm grip of someone who meant what she said. There's one more thing, Margaret added. The board wants to make a public statement about the recent events. Not just about Victor's departure, but about the culture changes we're implementing. They'd like you to be part of that statement, not a speech or anything elaborate, just standing there, representing the workers whose voices we need to hear. Would you be willing to do that? Samuel hesitated. Public statements meant cameras, media attention, the very visibility he had been avoiding, but he recognized the symbolic importance, understood that sometimes representation mattered as much as substance. Just standing there? He asked. I don't have to talk? Just standing there. Unless you want to talk. I don't. Then that's settled. The statement is scheduled for Friday morning. I'll have I'll have my assistant send you the details. Samuel returned to his work, but his mind kept circling back to the conversation, to the strange path his life had taken. 3 weeks ago, he had been invisible, content in his routine. Now he was coordinating mentorship programs and standing in press conferences, his face and name recognized by millions of strangers who knew nothing about him beyond a 2-minute video. The weight of it settled on his shoulders as he pushed his cleaning cart through empty hallways, as he wiped down surfaces and emptied trash bins, as he performed the familiar tasks that had defined his working life for longer than most of his coworkers had been alive. That evening, sitting in his small kitchen with a simple dinner of chicken and vegetables, Samuel finally opened his laptop and searched for himself online. He had been avoiding it, not wanting to see how the internet had digested and repackaged his moment. But curiosity won out. The results were overwhelming. Thousands of articles, videos, social media posts, think pieces analyzing what his confrontation with Victor represented. Some framed it as a story about racial justice, others about class conflict, still others about ageism or workplace dignity or the death of the American dream. Everyone had an interpretation, an angle, a way to make his story serve their agenda. He found videos of people imitating his calm response to Victor's mockery, found memes using his image to represent quiet dignity and hidden competence. He found academic papers being written about his race, sociological analyses of workplace hierarchy, political commentary about economic inequality. His face appeared on t-shirts, in editorial cartoons, in artwork that transformed him into something larger than human, a symbol, an icon, a representation of values he had simply tried to live without announcing. It was exhausting and alienating, seeing himself reflected back through so many distorted mirrors. None of them captured the reality. A man who fixed cars in his garage, who missed his wife, who worried about his daughter's student loans and his own retirement savings, who sometimes felt lonely in his quiet house, who had simply reached a point where accepting disrespect felt worse than the consequences of resistance. He closed the laptop and sat in silence, listening to the familiar sounds of his neighborhood, distant traffic, a dog barking, the hum of his old refrigerator. These were the sounds of his actual life, the life that existed before the race and would continue after the internet moved on to its next fascination. His phone buzzed, a text from his daughter Jessica. "Dad, I've been seeing all the coverage. Are you okay? Do you need me to come visit?" He typed back slowly, his large fingers awkward on the small keyboard. "I'm fine, just tired. A lot has changed quickly, but I'm managing." Her response came immediately. "I'm proud of you. Mom would be proud too. You showed people who you really are." Samuel read the message several times, feeling the warmth of her words, but also their fundamental misunderstanding. He hadn't shown people who he really was. He had shown them a single moment, a fragment of capability and dignity that existed alongside all the other fragments that made up a complete human life. The totality of who he was couldn't fit in a video or a news article or a viral moment. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was enough that one fragment had reached his daughter, had made her feel proud, had connected her to memories of her mother who would have understood exactly why he had accepted Victor's challenge. Friday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather, the kind of early spring day that promised better things ahead. Samuel dressed carefully in clean coveralls, though Margaret's office had offered to provide him with more formal clothing for the press conference. He had declined. If he was representing workers, he would represent them honestly, wearing the uniform he wore every day, carrying the visible markers of his actual job. The press conference was held in the main assembly area, the same space where Margaret had addressed employees earlier in the week. But today it was transformed, filled with cameras and journalists, lighting equipment and microphones, the machinery of public communication brought into a space designed for physical production. Samuel stood to the side with a group of other employees Margaret had invited, a cross-section of the workforce representing different departments and positions. A young Latina engineer named Sofia Rodriguez, an older white machinist named Bill Hendricks, who had worked at Langdon even longer than Samuel, a black woman from quality control named Denise Washington, a Vietnamese assembler named Tran Nguyen. Each person selected deliberately, each representing some aspect of the company's diversity and depth. Margaret stood at a podium, flanked by Richard Caldwell and Patricia Holbrook representing the board. She spoke clearly and directly, outlining the findings of the culture audit, acknowledging the failures of leadership, announcing the specific changes being implemented. Her tone was serious but not defensive, taking responsibility without making excuses. Langdon Automotive lost its way, she said. We forgot that our strength comes from the knowledge and capability of everyone who works here, not just those with executive titles. We created a culture where hierarchy was enforced through disrespect, where people learned to stay silent rather than contribute their ideas and concerns. That culture failed us, failed our customers, and failed the legacy that Thomas Langdon built. She outlined the new initiatives, the restructured HR department, the transparent complaint procedures, the mentorship program that would formalize knowledge transfer across the organization. Then she gestured toward the employees standing beside her. These people represent what Langdon Automotive needs to become. They bring decades of combined experience, deep knowledge of our products and processes, commitment to quality and integrity. They've been here all along, but we stopped seeing them, stopped listening to them, stopped valuing their contributions. That changes today. A reporter called out a question. Ms. Chen, can you comment on the viral video that led to these changes? Do you believe Samuel Reed's confrontation with Victor Langdon was the catalyst for the company finally addressing these issues? Margaret turned slightly, looking at Samuel, silently asking permission. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Mr. Reed's courage in standing up for his dignity absolutely catalyzed this transformation, Margaret said. But the problems he exposed had existed for years. Many employees had tried to raise concerns through proper channels and were ignored. What Samuel did was force us to confront publicly what we had been avoiding privately. He didn't create the problems, he made them impossible to ignore. Another reporter, Mr. Reed, would you like to comment on your role in these events? Samuel stepped forward slightly, not to the microphone, but enough to be clearly visible. The cameras focused on him, capturing his weathered face, his gray hair, his janitor's coveralls with the name patch, still reading Samuel in simple letters. He had prepared nothing to say, had no statement written or rehearsed. But looking at the assembled journalists, at his co-workers standing beside him, at the building where he had spent most of his adult life, words formed themselves naturally. I'm just a man who fixes cars and cleans buildings, he said, his voice quiet but clear. I'm not a hero or a symbol. I just got tired of being treated like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. What happened in that parking lot wasn't about beating anyone or proving anything. It was about dignity. Every person deserves to be seen, to be respected, to have their capabilities recognized regardless of their job title or position. That's all I wanted. That's all anyone should have to ask for. He stepped back, done speaking. The silence held for a moment before reporters erupted with follow-up questions, everyone wanting more, wanting him to expand or explain or provide better quotes for their stories. But Samuel had said everything that needed saying. He stood quietly while Margaret handled the remaining questions, while the press conference concluded, while the cameras were packed away, and the journalists dispersed to file their stories. Afterward, as the assembly area emptied, Sofia Rodriguez approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Reed, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been here 5 years, and I've watched talented people leave because they couldn't handle the culture. I almost left myself last year. What you did, it gave everyone permission to hope things might actually change." "Don't hope," Samuel said gently. "Watch. See if the changes they're promising actually happen. Hold them accountable. That's how things improve. Not through hope, but through persistent attention to whether actions match words." She smiled. "That's good advice. I'll remember that." As she walked away, Bill Hendricks, the white machinist, came over. He was 77, had worked at Langdon for 48 years, and in all that time, Samuel couldn't remember them having a conversation that lasted more than a few exchanged pleasantries. "Reed," Bill said, his voice gruff, "I owe you an apology." Samuel looked at him with surprise. "For what?" "For not saying anything over the years. I saw how some folks treated you, how they dismissed you because of your position, maybe because of your skin color too, though they'd never admit it. I saw it, and I stayed quiet because it wasn't my problem, wasn't affecting me directly. That was wrong. Should have stood up alongside you long before that race happened." The honesty landed heavily between them. Samuel extended his hand, and Bill shook it firmly. "You're standing up now," Samuel said. "That counts for something." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just old enough to finally understand that staying quiet when people are mistreated makes you part of the problem, even if you're not the one doing the mistreating." They stood together for a moment, two old men who had spent decades in the same building without really seeing each other, finally connecting across the distance that hierarchy and habit had maintained. As the day moved toward evening, Samuel returned to his regular duties with a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The public statement was done, the transformation formally announced. Now came the harder part, seeing whether promises translated into reality, whether the organization could actually change, or whether the familiar patterns would reassert themselves once media attention faded. He had learned over 73 years that real change was slow and difficult, requiring sustained effort and constant vigilance. He had also learned that moments of visibility, however dramatic, meant nothing without the patient work that followed. So he pushed his cleaning cart through the hallways, wiped down surfaces, emptied trash bins, and prepared himself for the long, unglamorous work of helping rebuild a culture one small interaction at a time. The viral moment had passed. The real work was just beginning. The mentorship program began quietly on a Tuesday morning in April, 6 weeks after the press conference. Samuel arrived at the small conference room Margaret had designated as the program's coordination space to find 3 people already waiting: Sofia Rodriguez, the young engineer he had spoken with after the announcement, Bill Hendricks, the veteran machinist, and a woman he didn't recognize, perhaps in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mr. Reed," Sofia said, standing as he entered. "This is Carmen Reyes. She's been working in the paint department for 12 years. I thought she might have valuable experience to share with newer employees." Carmen extended her hand, her grip firm and confident. "I've seen you around the building for years, Mr. Reed. Never thought I'd be sitting in a meeting with you, helping design a program like this." "I never thought I'd be designing programs at all," Samuel admitted, setting down the folder Margaret's assistant had prepared for him. Preliminary guidelines, suggested mentor-mentee pairings, evaluation metrics. "Seems like we're all doing things we didn't expect." They spent the next 2 hours discussing what the mentorship program should actually accomplish. The conversation revealed immediately that everyone brought different perspectives shaped by their distinct experiences within the company. Sofia focused on technical knowledge transfer. "We lose so much when experienced engineers retire," she argued. "They take decades of problem-solving experience with them, all the small tricks and adjustments that never get documented in official procedures. New hires have to relearn everything from scratch." Bill saw it differently. "It's not just about technical knowledge. It's about understanding the culture, learning how decisions get made, who to talk to when you need something done. That informal knowledge, that's what really makes someone effective here." Carmen brought another angle entirely. For people like me, people who started in entry-level positions without college degrees, the biggest barrier is confidence. I've learned enormous amounts over 12 years, but I still hesitate to speak up in meetings because I assume the engineers know better. A mentorship program could help people recognize their own expertise, help them understand that experience matters as much as credentials. Samuel listened carefully, taking notes in his careful handwriting, recognizing that each perspective was valid and necessary. The program couldn't be just one thing. It needed to address technical skills, cultural navigation, and psychological barriers simultaneously. So we need different kinds of mentorship relationships, he said slowly, working through the implications. Some focused on technical training, others on helping people understand how the organization functions, still others on building confidence and recognizing capability. That's more complicated than just pairing experienced workers with new hires, Sophia observed. Maybe complicated is what we need, Samuel replied. Simple programs are easy to implement, but they don't address real problems. Real problems are always complicated. Over the following weeks, they built something more sophisticated than Samuel had imagined possible. They identified potential mentors across every department, not just people with seniority, but people who colleagues naturally turned to for advice, who had reputations for patience and clear explanation, who represented the kind of knowledge and character the company needed to preserve and propagate. The process revealed surprising candidates. A young black woman in logistics named Keisha Palmer, who had developed innovative inventory tracking systems that saved the company thousands of hours annually. A Vietnamese machinist named Outrun, who could diagnose equipment problems by sound alone, a skill developed over 25 years of careful attention. A white engineer named David Morton, who had built a reputation for mentoring new hires informally, staying late to answer questions and review designs. Samuel interviewed each potential mentor personally, a process that took him away from his janitorial duties for hours each week. Margaret had hired additional maintenance staff to cover his regular work, but Samuel still arrived early and stayed late, unable to completely release his sense of responsibility for the building's upkeep. The interviews were revealing in ways he hadn't anticipated. Sitting across from colleagues he had worked alongside for years, asking them about their knowledge and experience, he discovered depths he had never suspected. People opened up in one-on-one conversations differently than they did in group settings, sharing insights and perspectives they had kept private, revealing expertise they had learned to hide because the previous culture had punished visibility. Keisha Palmer, the logistics specialist, described how she had taught herself advanced data analysis through free online courses, applying statistical methods to inventory management that transformed efficiency. But I never put it in writing, she explained. Never created formal documentation or asked for recognition because I saw what happened to people who stood out. They got assigned extra work without extra pay, or their ideas got stolen by managers who took credit. Safer to just do good work quietly. That changes now, Samuel told her. Your knowledge needs to be shared, taught to others, built into how we do things. You willing to do that? She hesitated, decades of caution warring with new possibilities. What if it goes badly? What if I train someone and they use it to make me redundant? Then the company's culture hasn't actually changed, and we'll deal with that problem when it emerges. But you can't live your whole career afraid of being too good at your job. That's not sustainable. Slowly, carefully, she nodded. Okay, I'll try. Similar conversations happened with other potential mentors, people emerging from protective silence, taking tentative risks based on promises that the culture had shifted. Samuel felt the weight of their trust, understood that if the program failed or if the old patterns reasserted themselves, these people would be exposed and vulnerable in ways they hadn't been before. By mid-May, they had identified 47 mentors representing every department and demographic group within the company. The mentees were selected through a combination of self-nomination and manager recommendation, a process designed to include people who actively sought development while not excluding those whose managers recognized unrealized potential. The first formal mentorship meetings were scheduled for the last week of May. Samuel spent the preceding days feeling uncharacteristically nervous, worried that the program he had helped design would fail immediately, that the carefully constructed pairings would prove ineffective, that the whole initiative would become another corporate program that generated paperwork but changed nothing. The night before the program launched, he called his daughter, Jessica. "How are you holding up, Dad?" she asked, her voice warm with concern. "Tired. This mentorship program is more work than I expected. I'm not sure I'm the right person to be coordinating it." "Why not? You've been mentoring people informally for decades." "That's different. That was just answering questions when people asked, showing them how to fix things. This is formal, structured, with documentation and evaluation metrics. It feels like I'm pretending to be something I'm not." Jessica was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a gentleness that reminded Samuel of her mother. "Dad, you know what Mom used to say about you? She said you were the most competent person she'd ever met, but you were so uncomfortable with recognition that you made yourself invisible. She worried that you would get to the end of your life having never let anyone see what you were actually capable of." The observation landed with unexpected force. Samuel hadn't thought about it in those terms, but Marie had been right. He had spent his entire career managing visibility downward, ensuring that his capabilities never exceeded what was expected from someone in his position. "Maybe this program is your chance to stop being invisible," Jessica continued, "not for attention or recognition, but just to use everything you know, everything you've learned. Mom would want that for you." After the call ended, Samuel sat in his quiet house thinking about visibility and capability, about the price of safety and the cost of hiding. He had protected himself successfully for decades, but protection had also meant limitation, had meant never fully developing or expressing the knowledge he possessed. The mentorship program was forcing him past those limitations, requiring visibility he had spent his life avoiding. But maybe at 73, with his career approaching its natural end, it was finally time to take risks he had been too cautious to accept earlier. The program's launch exceeded his cautious expectations. The first meetings generated immediate positive feedback, mentees describing helpful conversations, mentors expressing satisfaction at sharing their knowledge, managers noticing improved communication and collaboration. It wasn't universal success. Some pairings worked better than others. Some people engaged more seriously than others. But the overall trajectory was positive, the program gaining momentum and credibility. Samuel found himself drawn into problems he had never anticipated. A mentor who was excellent technically, but condescending in communication style, alienating the person he was supposed to help. A mentee who wanted career shortcuts rather than genuine skill development, treating the relationship as networking rather than learning. Personality conflicts, scheduling challenges, mismatched expectations, all the messy human complications that emerged when you tried to formalize something as organic as knowledge transfer. But he also witnessed transformation that justified all the difficulty. A young maintenance worker named Marcus Thompson paired with Bill Hendricks, learning not just technical skills, but the patient, methodical approach that separated good work from excellent work. An engineer named Rachel Kim, mentored by Keisha Palmer, discovering that efficiency improvements could come from unexpected sources if you listened carefully and questioned assumptions. The program created conversations that crossed departmental boundaries and hierarchical levels in ways the previous culture had actively prevented. People who had never interacted began sharing knowledge, collaborating on problems, recognizing that capability existed throughout the organization if you bothered to look for it. 2 months into the program, Margaret called Samuel to her office. She looked pleased, but also concerned, a combination that immediately put him on alert. "The mentorship program is succeeding beyond our initial projections," she began. "Participation rates are high, satisfaction surveys are overwhelmingly positive, and we're seeing measurable improvements in productivity and employee retention. The board wants to expand it, formalize it as a permanent part of our organizational structure." "That's good news," Samuel said cautiously, sensing the concern underneath her positive assessment. "It is, but expansion requires resources, dedicated staff, budget allocation, formal oversight. The board wants to create an official position, Director of Workforce Development, with responsibility for the mentorship program and other training initiatives, and they want to offer that position to you." Samuel sat back, processing the magnitude of what she was describing. Director-level positions meant executive status, significant salary increase, office space, administrative responsibilities far beyond anything he had ever considered. "I'm a janitor," he said quietly. "I don't have credentials for director-level work. No college degree, no management experience. No training in organizational development. You have 42 years of experience in this company, deep knowledge of its operations and culture, and you've successfully designed and launched a program that's transforming how we develop talent. Those qualifications matter more than credentials. But I'm 73 years old. How long would I even serve in this role before retiring? Margaret smiled slightly. That's a question only you can answer, but age isn't disqualifying. We need your knowledge now while you still have it, while you can teach others to carry it forward. I need to think about this, Samuel said. Of course, take whatever time you need. But Samuel, understand that this isn't charity or symbolic recognition. We're offering you this position because you're the best person for the job, because you've demonstrated capability that we desperately need. Don't decline it out of habit or discomfort with visibility. Decline it only if you genuinely don't want the responsibility. That evening, Samuel drove to the cemetery where Marie was buried. He hadn't visited in several months, life's complications creating distance from rituals that had once been regular. Her grave sat beneath an oak tree, the headstone simple granite with her name, dates, and a line from a poem she had loved. She walked in beauty like the night. He sat on the grass beside her grave, ignoring the dampness seeping through his pants, and talked to her the way he had when she was alive, out loud, working through complicated thoughts by speaking them into existence. They want to make me a director, Marie. Can you imagine? Me in an executive position, attending board meetings, managing budgets. It's absurd. I'm not that person. I never was that person. The wind moved through the oak tree, rustling leaves in a sound that might have been agreement or might have been challenge. But maybe that's the point. Maybe I've been wrong about who I am, what I'm capable of. Maybe I've been telling myself a story about my limitations that was really just fear disguised as realism. He thought about Jessica's comment, about Marie's observation that he made himself invisible. She had seen him clearly, had understood the contradiction between his capabilities and his self-conception. She had never pushed him to change, had loved him exactly as he was, but she had also recognized what he was sacrificing for safety. I wish you were here to tell me what to do, he said to the headstone. You always knew when I was avoiding things out of fear versus making wise choices. I can't tell the difference anymore. But even as he said it, he knew the answer. Marie would have encouraged him to take the position, not because she valued status or recognition, but because she valued growth, believed that people should continue developing and challenging themselves regardless of age. She had gone back to school at 55 to finish the nursing degree she had abandoned decades earlier when they had children. She had believed that capability mattered more than credentials, that learning never stopped, that fear was a reason to try rather than a reason to decline. He stayed at the cemetery until the sun began setting, until the groundskeeper made his final rounds and looked at Samuel with concern, wondering if the old man needed assistance. Samuel waved him off, stood slowly, brushed grass from his pants, and returned to his car with the decision crystallizing in his mind. The next morning, he met with Margaret and accepted the position, with one condition. He would continue doing his janitorial work for 2 mornings each week. I need to stay grounded, he explained. Need to maintain connection to the work that taught me everything I know. Can't direct workforce development if I forget what it's like to be workforce. Margaret agreed, recognizing the wisdom in maintaining that connection, understanding that Samuel's value came partly from never fully separating himself from the reality of hourly work. The announcement of Samuel's promotion generated immediate response within the company. Some employees celebrated it as validation of the culture change, proof that capability was being recognized regardless of traditional qualifications. Others responded with skepticism or resentment, questions about whether he was actually qualified, whether this was just performative gesture rather than genuine merit-based decision, whether someone without formal credentials could effectively lead at an executive level. The criticism was sharpest from some of the younger engineers and managers who had followed traditional career paths, earning advanced degrees and working their way up through structured progression. To them, Samuel's promotion felt like a violation of rules they had invested years following. David Morton, one of the engineers Samuel had identified as a potential mentor, stopped by his office. Samuel now had an office, a strange small space with a window and a desk that felt foreign and uncomfortable, to voice concerns. Mr. Reed, I respect what you've accomplished, but I'm struggling to understand this appointment. I have an MBA from Northwestern, 15 years of management experience, and I've been passed over for director positions twice. How is it fair that you get promoted to this level without comparable credentials? Samuel gestured for him to sit, appreciating the directness even as the criticism stung. You're right that it's not fair if we measure fairness by traditional metrics. You followed the rules, did everything the system said you should do, and you're not being rewarded the way you expected. Exactly. But maybe the system's rules have been wrong. Maybe credentials aren't the best measure of capability. Maybe experience and demonstrated results matter more than degrees and titles. And maybe it's not about fairness to individuals. It's about what the company needs to be successful. David's expression remained skeptical. That sounds like justification rather than principle. Maybe it is, Samuel acknowledged. I can't tell you I deserve this position by conventional standards. I can only tell you that I've built a program that's working, that I understand this company's culture and history in ways that someone newer couldn't, and that I'll work harder than anyone else to prove this decision was justified. If that's not enough, if you still think this is wrong, then you should say so. Silence doesn't help anyone. The honesty seemed to surprise David. He sat quietly for a moment, then nodded slowly. I appreciate you not deflecting or making excuses. I'll reserve judgment, see how you perform. But I wanted you to know that not everyone sees this promotion as obviously right. I'd be worried if everyone did, Samuel replied. Unanimous approval usually means nobody's thinking carefully. After David left, Samuel sat at his desk, still strange to think of it as his desk, and acknowledged the truth in the criticism. He was being held to different standards, benefiting from the cultural moment his confrontation with Victor had created. That didn't make the promotion wrong, but it did create obligations. He would need to prove himself continuously, demonstrating that capability rather than symbolism justified his position. Over the following months, he threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone, including himself. He expanded the mentorship program, created formal training modules for common maintenance and operational challenges, established regular forums where workers could share knowledge and troubleshoot problems collaboratively. He pushed for changes to hiring practices, arguing that the company should value demonstrated capability over educational credentials, creating pathways for talented hourly workers to advance into technical and management roles. Some initiatives succeeded, others failed. He made mistakes, misjudged situations, pushed changes too quickly or not quickly enough. But he learned from each failure, adjusted approach, kept moving forward with stubborn persistence that reminded people of the careful, methodical way he had rebuilt his Impala's engine, one piece at a time, with patience and attention to detail. The resistance didn't disappear, but it evolved. Critics shifted from questioning his qualifications to criticizing specific decisions, which felt like progress. Arguing about substance rather than credentials meant people were taking him seriously as an executive rather than dismissing him as a symbol. 6 months into his new role, the board conducted a formal review of the workforce development initiatives. The metrics were impressive. Employee satisfaction up 17%, retention of talented workers improved significantly, productivity gains across multiple departments, cost savings from reduced turnover and more efficient knowledge transfer. Richard Caldwell, who had championed Samuel from the beginning, addressed the board with quiet satisfaction. When we created this position, some people questioned whether we were making a mistake, whether we were letting cultural moment override sound business judgment. The results speak for themselves. Samuel Reed has transformed how this company develops and values its workforce. That transformation is generating measurable business benefits while also creating a culture people actually want to work in. But success brought new complications. Other companies began reaching out, wanting Samuel to consult on their workforce development programs, to share his approach, to help them replicate Langdon's transformation. Speaking invitations multiplied, conferences, universities, corporate training sessions. Publishers approached about book deals. Documentary filmmakers proposed projects. Samuel declined everything that would take him away from Langdon for more than a day. My knowledge comes from this specific place, he explained repeatedly. I can't package it and sell it as universal wisdom. It's particular, contextual, built from decades in these hallways and workshops. Taking it elsewhere would strip away what makes it valuable. But the attention created pressure within the company too. Margaret Chen, whose own leadership had been essential to the transformation, began receiving offers from other organizations wanting to hire her away. The board grew nervous about losing the leadership team that had reversed the company's decline. In September, nearly a year after the race that had changed everything, Margaret called Samuel to her office for a conversation that felt different from their usual check-ins. She looked tired, her composure showing cracks that hadn't been visible before. "I've been offered the CEO position at Redstone Manufacturing," she said without preamble. "It's a larger company, significant salary increase, opportunity to implement the same kind of transformation we've accomplished here. My family thinks I should take it." Samuel felt something drop in his chest, understanding immediately what her departure would mean. "Are you going to?" "I don't know. I believe in what we're building here, but I'm also 59 years old, and this might be my last opportunity for this level of position. If I decline, I'm choosing Langdon over my career advancement. That's a difficult choice." "What does your gut tell you?" Margaret smiled faintly. "My gut tells me that the work here isn't finished, that we've created momentum, but not permanence, that leaving now would risk everything reverting to old patterns. But my gut also tells me that I've sacrificed a lot of opportunities over the years by being too loyal to organizations that wouldn't have shown me the same loyalty." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had built something meaningful together, now facing the reality that all organizational relationships were ultimately temporary. "If you leave," Samuel said carefully, "would the board maintain these changes? Or would they bring in someone new who decides to return to traditional approaches?" "I honestly don't know. Richard would fight to preserve what we've built, but he's just one board member. If they hired a conventional CEO focused primarily on short-term financial performance, the culture work might get dismissed as expensive idealism." "Then stay," Samuel said simply. "Not forever, but until we've made this permanent enough to survive leadership changes. Another year, maybe 2. Make it so embedded that reversing it would be harder than maintaining it." Margaret studied him carefully. "That's asking me to sacrifice personal opportunity for organizational benefit." "Yes, and I wouldn't ask if I didn't think it mattered. But you know it does. You know how fragile this transformation still is, how easily it could collapse if the wrong person took over." She nodded slowly, and Samuel saw the decision forming before she spoke it. "Okay, I'll decline the offer, but Samuel, you need to help me create succession planning. We need to build this change deep enough that it survives both of us eventually leaving. Can you do that?" "I can try." That conversation sparked a new phase of work, not just maintaining the programs they had created, but institutionalizing them, building them into standard operating procedures and evaluation metrics and organizational structures that would persist beyond any individual leader's tenure. It was less visible work than the dramatic changes of the previous year, but in many ways more important, the difference between revolution and lasting reform. As autumn arrived and the days shortened, Samuel found himself reflecting on the strange journey from that March afternoon when he had accepted Victor's foolish bet. He had been trying only to claim basic dignity, to demonstrate that dismissing people based on position rather than capability was unjust and inaccurate. He hadn't intended to transform a company or become an executive or symbolize anything beyond his own individual worth. But consequences rarely matched intentions. His single act of resistance had created ripples that were still spreading, changing lives and careers and organizational structures in ways he couldn't have predicted. The responsibility of that sometimes felt crushing. So many people had invested hope in the changes his confrontation had sparked. And if those changes failed or reversed, he would feel personally responsible for their disappointment. Yet he also recognized that the transformation wasn't really about him, had never been about him despite the media framing and public attention. It was about principles larger than any individual: dignity, respect, recognition of capability wherever it existed. He had simply been the catalyst, the person who happened to be in the right place at the right moment with just enough courage to act rather than accept. His Impala still sat in the same parking spot it had occupied for years, still showed its rust and age, still ran with the quiet power of patient expertise applied over decades. Samuel still drove it daily, still maintained it carefully, still felt the satisfaction of knowing that what he had built with his own hands was reliable and capable regardless of its appearance. The car had become famous too, of course. People recognized it, took pictures with it, asked if it was the car from the video. Samuel mostly ignored the attention, but occasionally, when someone showed genuine curiosity about the mechanical work rather than just the viral moment, he would open the hood and explain what he had done, sharing knowledge with anyone interested enough to listen. Because that, ultimately, was what mattered. Not the race or the promotion or the organizational transformation, but the simple act of sharing knowledge, of recognizing and developing capability, of treating people with the dignity they deserved. Everything else was just consequence, important but secondary to those fundamental principles. As winter approached and Samuel's first full year as Director of Workforce Development neared completion, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Not satisfaction exactly, but purpose, the sense that his work mattered in ways that extended beyond immediate tasks. He was building something that would outlast him, creating systems and relationships that would continue developing talent and recognizing capability long after he retired. It was, he thought, exactly what Marie had wanted for him. Not fame or recognition, but the full expression of knowledge he had spent a lifetime accumulating, used in service of something larger than himself. She would have been proud, not of his title or success, but of his willingness to finally stop hiding, to risk visibility in pursuit of meaningful contribution. And that was enough. The call came on a gray February morning, nearly a year after the race that had upended everything. Samuel was at his desk reviewing applications for the second cohort of the mentorship program when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it. Unknown callers were usually journalists or speaking invitation coordinators, but something made him answer. "Mr. Reed, this is Detective Angela Martinez with the Detroit Police Department. I'm calling about Victor Langdon." Samuel felt his chest tighten. "Is he all right?" "He's physically fine, but he's been arrested. DUI, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. He listed you as his emergency contact. I realize that's unusual given your relationship, but he was quite insistent. Said you were the only person who would understand." Samuel sat back in his chair, processing this information. He hadn't spoken to Victor since the day security escorted him from the building. What does he need? Honestly, I think he needs help beyond what the legal system can provide. He's been living in his car for the past 3 weeks. The address we have on file, his Bloomfield Hills estate, he lost it to foreclosure 4 months ago. "Mr. Reed, I've been doing this job for 16 years, and I've seen a lot of people hit bottom. He's there. If you have any capacity to help him, now would be the time." After ending the call, Samuel sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the wall of his small office where he had hung photographs of mentorship program participants. The faces looked back at him, young and old, every race and background, people whose lives were improving because someone had finally bothered to invest in their development. This was his work now, his responsibility, his purpose. But the image of Victor living in his car, calling Samuel from a jail cell, wouldn't leave his mind. He could ignore it, could justify that Victor's downfall was self-created, that he deserved no sympathy or assistance. Many people would understand that choice, would even applaud it as appropriate boundary setting. Samuel picked up his phone and called Margaret's office. "I need to take a personal day," he told her assistant. "Something's come up that requires my attention." 2 hours later, he walked into the Detroit Police Department's central booking area. The facility was exactly what he expected. Fluorescent lights, scuffed linoleum, the smell of industrial cleaning products mixing with human desperation. Detective Martinez met him near the entrance, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and the bearing of someone who had witnessed too much human failure. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Reed. I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Samuel admitted. "Where is he?" She led him through security, down a hallway lined with holding cells, to a small interview room. Victor sat at a metal table, his hands folded, his appearance shocking. The confident, arrogant CEO had disappeared, replaced by someone hollowed out, diminished. His expensive clothes had been replaced by a stained sweatshirt and jeans. His hair, once carefully styled, was greasy and unkempt. His face showed the puffy, unhealthy appearance of someone who had been drinking heavily for months. When Victor looked up and saw Samuel, something crumpled in his expression. Relief mixed with shame, gratitude mixed with humiliation. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Victor said, his voice rough. Samuel sat down across from him. Detective Martinez left them alone, closing the door behind her. What happened to you? Samuel asked quietly. Victor laughed, but the sound held no humor. What didn't happen? The board fired me. My wife filed for divorce. Investors sued me personally for negligence. The house went into foreclosure. My mother called me a disgrace to my father's memory. She was right. Where have you been living? My car. A different Ferrari, ironically, the one thing the creditors haven't seized yet. I've been sleeping in parking lots using gym memberships to shower. Very poetic, right? The man who mocked you for driving an old car, now living in a newer one because he has nowhere else to go. Samuel said nothing, waiting. Victor continued, words spilling out with the desperate energy of confession. After they fired me, I thought I'd just start over. Use my connections, get another CEO position, prove everyone wrong. But nobody would hire me. The video, the story, it followed me everywhere. Companies said I was too controversial, too associated with failure and humiliation. My reputation was destroyed. So you started drinking. I'd always drunk, but socially, controlled. This was different. This was trying to stop thinking, stop remembering. Stop seeing that parking lot, that race, your face when you won. Stop hearing the laughter, the mockery, the contempt. Do you know what it's like to become a joke? To have your lowest moment replayed millions of times, analyzed and mocked by strangers? No, Samuel said honestly. But I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be treated as less than human, to have your dignity denied. I lived with that for decades. Victor flinched. I know. I know I did that to you. I did it to a lot of people. I thought it made me strong, made me a leader. I thought disrespecting people who I saw as beneath me was just how power worked. Why did you list me as your emergency contact? Victor was quiet for a long moment. Because you're the only person who ever told me the truth. Everyone else, they either worshiped me because I had money and power, or they hated me because I was an arrogant asshole. But you, in that parking lot, you didn't do either. You just stood up for your dignity. You didn't try to destroy me or humiliate me. You just refused to accept being disrespected. That's haunted me more than all the mockery and failure. The fact that you had every right to be cruel, and you weren't. Samuel studied the broken man across from him, seeing past the immediate degradation to something more complicated underneath. Victor had been arrogant, cruel, dismissive, all true. But he had also been shaped by expectations and pressures Samuel could only partially understand. Raised to fill shoes he was never equipped to wear, given power without wisdom and responsibility without preparation. What do you want from me? Samuel asked. I don't know. Forgiveness? Advice? Just acknowledgement that I'm sorry? That I understand what I did was wrong? I've lost everything, Samuel. Everything. And I deserve it. But I don't know how to live with who I've become. Samuel breathed slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. He could walk away, could tell Victor that his redemption wasn't Samuel's responsibility, that the consequences he faced were justice rather than tragedy. That would be defensible, reasonable, the choice many people would encourage. But sitting across from this ruined man, Samuel recognized something Marie had tried to teach him throughout their marriage. That dignity wasn't transactional, that treating people with humanity wasn't something you only did for those who deserved it. You did it because maintaining your own humanity required extending it, even to those who had failed to extend it to you. I accept your apology, Samuel said quietly. I believe you're sorry. I believe you understand what you did wrong, but apology isn't enough. The question is what you do next, how you rebuild from here. I don't know how. I don't have skills for anything except being CEO, and nobody will hire me for that. I have no money, no home, no family who'll speak to me. I'm 47 years old and I have to start completely over with nothing. How do you even begin that? Samuel considered this carefully. The same way anyone begins anything. One small step, then another, building slowly over time. You think you have no skills, but that's not true. You know business operations, understand corporate dynamics, can read financial reports and strategic plans. Those are real capabilities, even if you misuse them. None of that matters if nobody will hire me. Then you do what millions of people do. You take whatever work you can get, prove yourself through performance, rebuild trust one interaction at a time. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. You'll have to accept positions far below what you think you deserve. But if you actually do the work, actually treat people with respect, actually learn from your mistakes, eventually you can build something real. Victor looked at him with raw desperation. Will you help me? Samuel felt the question's implications rippling outward. Helping Victor meant investing time and energy in someone who had treated him terribly, who had mocked and dismissed and humiliated him publicly. It meant extending grace to someone many people would say deserved none. It meant complicating his own life for someone else's benefit with no guarantee of positive outcome. He thought about the mentorship program, about the principle that knowledge should be shared and capability developed regardless of who possessed it. He thought about Marie, who had spent her nursing career caring for difficult patients with the same compassion she showed everyone else, who had believed that humanity was something you maintained rather than something you earned. I'll help you, Samuel said, but not by giving you handouts or making things easy. I'll help you the way I help anyone, by creating opportunities for you to demonstrate capability, by being honest about your failures, by holding you accountable for your choices. If you're willing to accept that kind of help, then yes. Relief and something like hope flickered across Victor's face. What do I need to do? First, we deal with your immediate legal problems. Then we get you into treatment for the drinking. Then we find you actual work, real work, entry-level work, the kind of work you used to dismiss as beneath you. You'll start at the bottom and prove you can be reliable and respectful and competent. No shortcuts, no special treatment. You willing to do that? Victor nodded slowly. Yes, I have nothing else left to lose. Over the following weeks, Samuel became an unlikely advocate for his former tormentor. He connected Victor with a public defender who negotiated a plea deal, mandatory alcohol treatment, community service, suspended license, but no jail time. He helped Victor find a bed in a transitional housing program for men recovering from addiction. He attended AA meetings with him, sitting in uncomfortable church basements, listening to stories of loss and recovery, providing the steady presence that helped Victor stay committed when the work became difficult. The recovery wasn't linear or simple. Victor relapsed twice in the first month, disappearing for days at a time, returning shame-faced and defeated. Each time, Samuel met him without judgment, simply asking what he had learned and what he would do differently next time. The patience wore on Samuel, cost him sleep and energy, created stress he hadn't anticipated. But he maintained it because the alternative was abandoning someone who was genuinely trying to change. 3 months into Victor's recovery, Samuel approached Margaret with a proposal that made her immediately concerned. "You want to hire Victor Langdon?" she said slowly, her tone carefully neutral. "The same Victor Langdon who ran this company into the ground, who created the toxic culture we've spent a year dismantling, who publicly humiliated you in that parking lot." "Yes." "Samuel, help me understand the reasoning here. This feels like it could undo everything we've built." Samuel had anticipated this reaction, had prepared his argument carefully. Our culture transformation is based on principles, that people can grow and change, that capability matters more than credentials or history, that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity to develop. If we only apply those principles to people we like, to people who haven't wronged us, then they're not really principles. They're just preferences. But there are reasonable limits. Victor caused enormous damage. Bringing him back could demoralize employees, could make people question whether we're serious about accountability. Which is why I'm not proposing bringing him back as an executive. I'm proposing hiring him in facilities maintenance, working alongside me 2 days a week. Let him learn what it's like to do the work he used to dismiss. Let him demonstrate whether his apologies are genuine or just words. If he fails, we fire him. If he succeeds, we prove that our culture can actually accommodate redemption, not just punishment. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "You realize that helping him makes you vulnerable? That people will question your judgment, will say you're being manipulated, or that you have poor boundaries? People will say lots of things. They always do. But I know what I'm doing and why. Victor needs a chance to rebuild, and we need to prove our principles can survive their hardest tests. This does both." She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I trust your judgment, but he starts on probation, with clear performance expectations and zero tolerance for disrespect or failure to meet standards. Agreed?" "Agreed." When Samuel told Victor about the job offer, The younger man's reaction was complex. Gratitude mixed with apprehension, hope tempered by fear of failing again. "I'll be working as a janitor," Victor said, testing the words, trying to reconcile them with his self-image. "You'll be working in facilities maintenance," Samuel corrected. "Learning how buildings function, how to fix problems, how to maintain systems that keep operations running. It's skilled work, important work. The fact that you previously dismissed it says more about your ignorance than the work's value." "What if I'm terrible at it?" "Then you'll learn. That's the point. Not to prove you're already capable, but to develop capability through actual effort. Can you do that?" Victor nodded slowly. "I can try." His first day at Langdon Automotive in his new role generated exactly the response Margaret had predicted: shock, confusion, anger from employees who saw his return as betrayal of the culture changes. A group of workers submitted a formal complaint to HR, arguing that hiring Victor undermined the company's commitment to protecting employees from hostile leadership. Samuel attended the meeting where the complaint was addressed, sitting beside Victor, speaking honestly about his reasoning and acknowledging the legitimate concerns. "I understand your anger," he told the assembled group. "Victor treated many of you terribly. He created a culture where disrespect was normalized, where speaking up invited retaliation, where your dignity was conditional on your position. Those harms were real and serious. But our response to those harms has been building something better, a culture based on dignity, respect, development of capability. That culture requires us to believe that people can change, can learn from failures, can grow beyond their worst moments. If we don't extend that belief to Victor, then we're admitting we don't really believe it at all." A black woman from Quality Control, Denise Washington, spoke with controlled fury. "He doesn't deserve redemption. He deserves consequences." "He's had consequences," Samuel replied. "He lost everything: his position, his wealth, his family, his reputation. He's lived in his car, struggled with addiction, faced the reality of his failures. At what point does punishment become sufficient? At what point do we allow people to rebuild?" "When they've actually proven they've changed," Denise shot back. "Not after 3 months of trying. When he's demonstrated over years that he's different, then maybe we can consider whether he deserves to be here." "How does he demonstrate that if we never give him the opportunity?" Samuel asked. "Change requires practice, requires being allowed to fail and try again in environments that support growth. I'm not asking you to forgive him or trust him or even like him. I'm asking you to allow him the same opportunity we've extended to everyone else, to prove himself through performance." The meeting ended without resolution, the complaint remaining open, the tension unresolved. But as weeks passed and Victor showed up daily, did his work quietly, accepted correction without defensiveness, treated everyone with careful respect, the active hostility began shifting into wary observation. Samuel worked beside him during those first months, teaching him maintenance tasks with the same patient attention he had brought to training countless workers over the decades. Victor learned slowly, his hands awkward with tools, his body unused to physical labor, his pride struggling with the humility required to admit ignorance and accept instruction. But he learned, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and frustrations, but with genuine effort that became visible to those watching carefully. He arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for difficult tasks, apologized when he made mistakes, thanked people who helped him. The performance was so careful, so obviously effortful, that it gradually became clear this wasn't manipulation. It was someone genuinely trying to become different than he had been. 6 months into Victor's employment, a crisis emerged that tested everything Samuel had been building. A major client visited to inspect production facilities before renewing a multi-million-dollar contract. During the tour, a hydraulic system failed catastrophically, flooding the main assembly area, halting production, creating exactly the kind of chaos that could cost Langdon the contract and damage their reputation irreparably. Samuel was in a meeting when the emergency call came. He rushed to the assembly floor to find water spreading across the workspace, workers evacuating, managers panicking, the client representatives looking concerned and unimpressed. The hydraulic system was complex, specialized, typically requiring outside contractors to repair. Contractors who couldn't arrive for hours, maybe days, leaving production halted and the client convinced that Langdon couldn't manage basic operational reliability. Samuel assessed the situation quickly, tracing the failure to a ruptured pressure valve deep in the system's core. He knew the equipment intimately, had maintained it for years before Victor's tenure, had watched it being installed decades ago when the assembly line was first established. "I can fix this," he told Margaret, who had arrived to manage the crisis. "But I need help. It's a two-person job, requires someone to access the valve from below while I work from above. Who can help you? Most of the maintenance team doesn't have experience with this system." Samuel hesitated, knowing his answer would generate concern. "Victor, he's been training with me for 6 months, learning these systems. He can do it." Margaret's expression tightened. "Samuel, the client is watching. If this fails, we lose the contract. Are you certain?" "I'm certain he can follow instructions and perform physical work carefully. That's all I need." She nodded reluctantly, and Samuel called Victor over. The younger man looked terrified when he understood what was required, crawling into a confined space beneath the hydraulic system, working with pressurized equipment, performing precise adjustments while Samuel coordinated from above. One mistake could cause more damage or even physical injury. "I trust you to do this right," Samuel said quietly, "but only if you're confident you can. If you have doubts, tell me now." Victor breathed deeply, visibly steadying himself. "I can do it. Tell me what you need." For the next 90 minutes, they worked in careful coordination, Samuel calling instructions, Victor executing them with shaking hands that gradually steadied as muscle memory and training overcame fear. The client representatives watched in silence, observing not just the technical repair but the relationship between the elderly black man directing operations and the younger white man following orders without hesitation or resentment. When the final connection was secured and Samuel reactivated the system, it hummed back to life smoothly, pressure normalizing, the flood containment complete. The assembly area could be cleaned and production resumed within hours rather than days. The client's senior representative, a woman named Patricia Joe, approached Samuel as workers began cleanup operations. "That was impressive work, Mr. Reed. You clearly know these systems better than anyone. But I'm curious about your assistant. Isn't that Victor Langdon, former CEO of this company?" Samuel wiped hydraulic fluid from his hands, considering his response. "Yes, ma'am. He's in facilities maintenance now, learning the actual work that keeps this company running." "I heard about what happened last year. The race, the culture problems, the leadership change. We almost pulled our contract because of the uncertainty. Now I'm watching the former CEO take orders from the man he publicly humiliated, working beside him with what looks like genuine respect. That's quite a transformation." "We're trying to build something different here," Samuel said. "A culture where capability matters more than position, where people can grow and change, where dignity flows in all directions. It's not perfect, and we fail sometimes. But we keep trying." Patricia smiled slightly. "Well, you've definitely succeeded in showing us something we didn't expect. The contract renewal is approved, but more than that, I'm going to recommend Langdon to other clients. Not because of your products, though those are excellent, but because of what you're building here. Culture like this is rare, and it's valuable." The contract renewal generated celebration throughout the company, not just for the financial security, but for validation that the culture transformation was creating tangible business value. At the celebration Margaret organized, she publicly recognized Samuel's critical role in the repair, praising his expertise and quick thinking. But Samuel insisted on recognizing Victor as well, describing his careful work and steady performance under pressure. The applause that followed was tentative, uncertain, but it existed. Acknowledgement that Victor was contributing rather than just occupying space, that his redemption might be real rather than performance. Later that evening, as Samuel and Victor cleaned and organized tools in the maintenance shop, the younger man spoke quietly. "Thank you for trusting me today. I know the risk you took." "You earned the trust through 6 months of reliable work," Samuel replied. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't believe you could do it." "I keep thinking about that race, about how I treated you. I was so certain I was superior, that my position and money made me better than you. Then you beat me, and it destroyed everything I believed about myself. I spent months hating you for that, blaming you for my failure. It took hitting absolute bottom before I could understand that you didn't destroy me. I destroyed myself. You just refused to participate in my delusion." Samuel hung up the tools carefully before responding. You know what the hardest part has been? Not the work of helping you recover, but watching other people struggle with it. People who I've taught to trust me, who believe in the culture we're building, feeling betrayed because I extended opportunity to someone who hurt them. They're not wrong to feel that way. You did hurt them. The culture you created caused real damage. So why help me? Why risk what you've built for someone who doesn't deserve it? Because deserving isn't the right framework. Nobody deserves dignity or opportunity based on merit. Those things should be basic, available to everyone regardless of whether they've earned them. What varies is how we use those opportunities, whether we grow from them or waste them. You're using yours. That's enough. Victor was quiet for a moment. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become worthy of this chance. Then focus on the work, not the worthiness. Be useful, be respectful, be reliable. Let the worthiness take care of itself. As autumn arrived again, marking 18 months since the race that had catalyzed everything, Samuel began feeling his age in ways he hadn't before. The physical work of maintaining his dual role, facilities maintenance and workforce development, was taking its toll. His joints ached more persistently. Fatigue came earlier each day. He found himself needing reading glasses for the first time, struggling with documents and computer screens. Jessica noticed during her Thanksgiving visit, commenting on how tired he looked, expressing concern about the pace he was maintaining. "Dad, you're 74 years old. You're working more now than you did as a full-time janitor. Maybe it's time to think about actual retirement, about resting instead of proving yourself." "I'm not proving myself," Samuel protested. "I'm doing work that matters. Work that will still matter after you retire. You've built systems and trained people. The work will continue without you running yourself into the ground." The conversation stayed with him through the holiday season and into the new year. He began delegating more of the workforce development responsibilities, training Sofia Rodriguez to take over coordination of the mentorship program, teaching Carmen Reyes to manage the knowledge-sharing forums. Not because he was ready to stop, but because he recognized that building something sustainable meant ensuring it didn't depend entirely on his personal involvement. In March, exactly 2 years after the race, Margaret called him to her office with news that felt both inevitable and momentous. "The board wants to formalize your role," she began. "They're proposing we create an endowed position, Director of Workforce Development and Culture, with funding guaranteed regardless of economic conditions. They want to announce it at the company's 75th anniversary celebration next month. And Samuel, they want to name the position after you." Samuel sat back heavily. "Name it after me?" "The Samuel Reed Chair of Workforce Development, endowed with $2 million, ensuring the position continues in perpetuity. It would be your legacy, your contribution formalized as permanent part of the company's structure." "I don't need legacy or recognition." "I know, but the company needs it. We need to signal that culture and workforce development aren't optional initiatives we pursue when convenient. They're fundamental to who we are. Naming the position after you makes that commitment permanent and visible." Samuel struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of him recoiled from the grandiosity, from having his name attached to something so formal and public. But another part recognized the strategic importance, understood that symbols mattered in organizational change, that permanent structures required permanent markers. "What would this mean practically?" he asked. "You would serve in the role for as long as you choose. Could be 1 more year, could be 5. When you retire, we would hire your successor to fill the Samuel Reed chair, continuing the work you started. Your knowledge and approach would become institutional rather than personal." "And if I say no?" Margaret smiled slightly. "Then I'll respect your decision, and we'll find another way to ensure the work continues. But Samuel, sometimes accepting recognition isn't about ego, it's about responsibility. You've built something important. Letting it be named after you helps ensure it survives beyond your tenure. That's not vanity, that's stewardship." He thought about Marie, about how she would have responded to this opportunity. She would have encouraged him to accept, he knew, would have seen it as appropriate acknowledgement of knowledge and effort. She had never understood his compulsion toward invisibility, had gently challenged it throughout their marriage. "Okay," he said quietly, "I'll accept. But on one condition. When we announce this, we also announce that Victor Langdon has successfully completed his probationary period and is being promoted to full-time facilities maintenance technician. If we're celebrating transformation, we celebrate all of it, including the difficult parts. Margaret considered this carefully. That will generate controversy. Some people still aren't comfortable with his presence here. I know, but transformation that only accommodates easy changes isn't real transformation. It's just public relations. Real change means accepting that redemption is possible, even for people who've caused serious harm. All right, we'll announce both. The 75th anniversary celebration was held in the main assembly area, transformed with banners and displays showing the company's history. Black and white photographs of Thomas Langdon working alongside his original employees, images of the first vehicles produced, documentation of the company's growth and evolution. Current employees mixed with retirees who had returned for the occasion, multiple generations united by connection to Langdon Automotive's legacy. Samuel stood uncomfortably in a new suit Jessica had insisted on buying him, watching the celebration unfold, still feeling like an imposter among the executives and board members. Richard Caldwell found him near the refreshment table, looking amused at Samuel's discomfort. "Relax, Samuel. You belong here more than most people in this room." "I belong in coveralls with a cleaning cart, not in a suit at a ceremony naming things after me." "You belong wherever your knowledge and effort have earned you place. That's the principle you've been teaching everyone else. Maybe it's time you applied it to yourself." When Margaret called the celebration to order and began her remarks, Samuel listened with growing emotion as she described the company's transformation over the past 2 years. The culture shift from hierarchy and disrespect to dignity and development, the measurable improvements in every metric that mattered. Then she invited Samuel forward, and he walked to the front of the assembly area, feeling every eye tracking his movement, aware of phones recording, conscious that this moment would be preserved and shared like that parking lot confrontation 2 years earlier. Margaret described his contributions, his 44 years of service, his expertise in patient teaching, his courage in standing up for dignity when it would have been easier to remain silent. Then she announced the endowed position, the Samuel Reed Chair of Workforce Development and Culture, permanent funding, ensuring the work would continue beyond any individual's tenure. The applause was genuine and sustained, people standing, recognizing not just Samuel, but the principles his work represented. He stood accepting it awkwardly, unused to being seen, still learning how to occupy visibility without discomfort. When the applause finally subsided, he stepped to the microphone, unscripted, trusting that the right words would come. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his voice quiet but clear. "I've spent my career doing rather than talking, showing rather than explaining. But I want to say something about transformation, about what we've built here over the past 2 years." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Transformation isn't about one person or one moment. It's not about a race or a viral video or even about systemic change at an organizational level. Transformation is about thousands of small choices made daily by everyone who works here. Choices to treat people with respect even when hierarchies suggest you don't have to. Choices to develop capability wherever you find it, regardless of credentials or position. Choices to believe that people can grow and change even when their past suggests otherwise. He looked across the assembled crowd, seeing faces he had known for decades and faces that were new, seeing the diversity that had always existed but was finally being valued rather than merely tolerated. Someone asked me recently if I was proud of what I've accomplished. I said no, because I haven't accomplished anything alone. Every improvement, every change, every success, those belong to all of us. To everyone who chose to believe that culture could be different, that dignity could be universal, that knowledge and capability mattered more than position and credentials. He gestured toward where Victor stood near the back of the crowd, his expression carefully controlled. Part of transformation is accepting that redemption is real, that people who have failed and caused harm can learn and grow and contribute. Victor Langdon created serious damage here, hurt people through his arrogance and disrespect. But he's also spent the past year learning, working, demonstrating through consistent effort that change is possible. Today we're announcing his promotion to full-time facilities maintenance technician, not because we've forgotten what he did, but because we're committed to the principle that everyone deserves the opportunity to grow beyond their worst moments. The response was mixed, some applause, some silence, visible discomfort from employees still processing whether they could accept Victor's presence. Samuel had expected this, had known the announcement would be controversial. I know that's difficult for some of you, he continued. I know extending grace to someone who hasn't earned it feels wrong, feels like betraying the people he hurt. But here's what I've learned over 74 years of living. Dignity and respect can't be conditional. Either everyone deserves them, or they're just privileges we grant to people we approve of. Real transformation means choosing the harder path, choosing to see humanity even in people who failed to show it to others. He stepped back from the microphone, done speaking. The applause that followed was thoughtful rather than enthusiastic, people processing complex ideas rather than simply celebrating. That felt appropriate to Samuel. Transformation should be complicated, should require thought and struggle and honest wrestling with difficult questions. Later, as the celebration wound down and people began departing, Victor approached Samuel hesitantly. Thank you for what you said, for acknowledging that I'm trying even though I don't deserve the recognition. Stop thinking about deserving, Samuel said. Start thinking about what you're building, who you're becoming. The past matters, but it doesn't determine everything. You get to write new chapters if you're willing to do the work. I am. I will. For however long it takes. They stood together for a moment, two men whose lives had intersected in a parking lot 2 years earlier in a moment of conflict that had catalyzed more change than either could have anticipated. The relationship between them was strange and complicated. Not quite friendship, not quite mentorship, something more nuanced that didn't fit clean categories. But it was real, built from honest effort and mutual recognition of shared humanity despite enormous differences in background and experience. And that, Samuel thought, was exactly what transformation looked like. Not clean or simple or easily categorized, but messy and difficult and ultimately meaningful. As spring arrived and Samuel's 75th birthday approached, he began seriously considering retirement. Not immediately, but within the next year or two, while he still had energy to enjoy it, while he could transition his responsibilities thoughtfully rather than being forced out by declining health or capability. He met with Margaret to discuss succession planning to identify who might fill the Samuel Reed chair after his departure. They reviewed candidates carefully, people who understood both the technical and cultural aspects of workforce development, who had demonstrated commitment to the principles Samuel had established, who could build on the foundation without simply replicating his exact approach. Sofia Rodriguez emerged as the strongest candidate. She had grown enormously over the past 2 years, developing from a promising engineer into a thoughtful leader who understood that technical excellence and cultural intelligence were equally important. She was young, only 32, but that was advantage rather than limitation, bringing energy and contemporary perspective to complement the institutional knowledge Samuel had built. She'll do it differently than I would, Samuel told Margaret. She'll bring new ideas, challenge assumptions, take the work in directions I wouldn't have considered. That's exactly what we need. Continuity of principles, but innovation in application. When will you tell her? Soon. Give her time to prepare, to learn what she needs to learn before I actually step back. Maybe 18 months, 2 years. Long enough for smooth transition. The conversation with Sofia happened on a warm May afternoon, in the same small conference room where the mentorship program had first been designed. She listened with growing astonishment as Samuel described the plan, struggled to process the magnitude of what he was proposing. Mr. Reed, I'm honored, but I'm not qualified for this. I don't have your experience, your knowledge, You have something better, he interrupted gently. You have the capacity to learn, the willingness to question assumptions, the courage to try new approaches. Those qualities matter more than accumulated knowledge. Knowledge can be taught. Character and capability can only be developed. But people respect you. They trust you. You're just a talented engineer who's demonstrated leadership, who people already turn to for guidance, who represents the future of this company. Stop thinking about what you lack. Start thinking about what you can build. She nodded slowly, accepting the challenge even as fear flickered across her face. Samuel recognized that fear, had felt it himself when Margaret first offered him the director position, when the weight of visibility and responsibility seemed overwhelming. But he had learned that fear was often a sign you were attempting something meaningful, something that required growth rather than just application of existing skills. Over the following months, he began teaching Sofia everything he knew, not just the formal procedures and programs, but the informal knowledge that came from decades of observation and practice. how to read organizational dynamics, how to identify genuine concerns beneath surface complaints, how to build coalitions across hierarchical boundaries, how to maintain principles while adapting tactics to changing circumstances. She absorbed it hungrily, asked smart questions, challenged assumptions, brought new perspectives that reminded Samuel that his approach wasn't the only valid one, that evolution was necessary for sustainability. By autumn, 2.5 years after the race, Samuel felt ready to announce his retirement timeline. He would serve one more full year in the position, ensuring smooth transition, then step back into advisor role, available for consultation but no longer carrying daily operational responsibility. It felt right, ending while he still had energy and capability, while retirement was choice rather than necessity. The announcement generated expected responses: appreciation mixed with concern about his departure, questions about whether the culture transformation could survive without his direct involvement, speculation about whether Sophia could fill his role effectively. But Samuel had confidence that the work would continue. He had built systems and trained people, had institutionalized principles, and created structures that didn't depend on his personal involvement. The Samuel Reed chair would continue regardless of who occupied it. The mentorship program had become embedded in standard operations. The culture of dignity and respect had become strong enough to resist casual reversal. And if problems emerged, if the organization began drifting back toward old patterns, well, there would be other people like him, other workers who recognized when principles were being violated, who would have the courage to stand up and demand better. That was the real legacy, not programs or positions, but the idea that ordinary people could challenge unjust systems and create meaningful change through simple acts of dignity and persistence. On his last official day as Director of Workforce Development, Samuel spent the morning doing what he had always done: cleaning offices, restocking supplies, maintaining the building that had been his workplace for 46 years. He had insisted on this ritual, on ending where he had begun, on demonstrating that the work he had done for decades remained valuable and important regardless of titles or recognition. Victor worked alongside him, now a skilled technician who moved through maintenance tasks with growing confidence and competence. They worked mostly in silence, the comfortable quiet of people who had learned to communicate through shared labor rather than constant conversation. "What will you do with all your time?" Victor asked as they cleaned the executive conference room where so many important decisions had been made. "Fix my car, visit my daughter, read books I've been meaning to get to for years, maybe build something in my garage just for the satisfaction of creating." Sounds peaceful. It does, but I'll miss this too. Miss the people, the problems, the satisfaction of helping things work properly. Victor paused in his cleaning, looking at Samuel directly. "You saved my life. I want you to know that. I was ready to give up completely, ready to let addiction and despair finish what humiliation started. You extended grace I didn't deserve, taught me that change was possible. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor that gift." Samuel set down his cleaning supplies and met Victor's eyes. Then honor it by extending the same grace to others. Help people who are struggling, who have failed, who need someone to believe in their capacity for growth. That's how this works. Not hoarding the grace you've received, but passing it forward to whoever needs it next. "I will, I promise." That afternoon, the company held a retirement celebration, nothing as elaborate as the anniversary event, just colleagues gathering to acknowledge Samuel's departure, to share stories and express gratitude. People spoke about how he had helped them over the years, how his patient teaching had developed their skills, how his quiet dignity had shown them what leadership could look like. Sophia gave the final remarks, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. "Mr. Reed taught me that transformation isn't about dramatic gestures or viral moments. It's about consistent effort, applied daily, by people who believe that things can be better, even when evidence suggests otherwise. He taught me that knowledge is meant to be shared, that capability exists everywhere if we bother to look for it, that dignity is something we owe each other regardless of position or power. Those lessons will guide everything I do in the position he's created. Thank you, Samuel, for showing us what's possible." The applause was warm and genuine, people standing, acknowledging not just Samuel's work, but the principles it represented. He accepted it with more comfort than he would have 2 years earlier, having slowly learned that visibility didn't diminish dignity, that being seen could be acceptable if you maintained integrity while accepting recognition. As the celebration ended and people dispersed, Samuel walked alone to the employee parking lot one final time as a Langdon Automotive employee. His Impala sat in its familiar spot, still rust-scarred and humble in appearance, still containing the hidden power of decades of careful work. He ran his hand along the car's hood, feeling the familiar texture of aged metal and faded paint. This car had been his companion through enormous change, had been both the catalyst for transformation and the constant reminder of who he was beneath titles and recognition. He thought about that March afternoon 2 years ago, about accepting Victor's reckless bet, about choosing visibility over safety. He couldn't have predicted what would follow: the viral video, the organizational transformation, the mentorship program, the executive position, the endowed chair bearing his name. None of it had been planned or intended. But maybe that was how real change always happened, not through careful planning, but through simple acts of courage that created openings for larger transformation, through individual choices that catalyzed collective movement, through ordinary people deciding that dignity mattered more than comfort or safety. He had been just a janitor driving an old car, tired of being disrespected. He hadn't set out to change a company, or become a symbol, or leave a legacy. He had simply stood up for himself, demonstrated capability he had been hiding, refused to accept treatment that denied his humanity. Everything else had followed from that simple choice: the choice to be seen, to be counted, to claim the dignity that belonged to him regardless of whether anyone else recognized it. As Samuel drove home that evening, the Impala running smoothly beneath him, the late autumn sun painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with who he was, what he had done, and what he was leaving behind. The work would continue, the principles would endure, the transformation would persist beyond his direct involvement. He had done what Marie had wanted for him, stopped hiding, used his knowledge fully, contributed something meaningful that would outlast his personal tenure. He had shown that ordinary people possessing patience, skill, and dignity could change systems that seemed immutable, could challenge power structures that appeared unshakable, could create lasting transformation through simple, consistent effort applied over time. The viral video would eventually be forgotten, replaced by newer content, newer stories, newer moments of drama and conflict. But the culture he had helped build, the programs he had established, the principles he had modeled, those would remain, built into Langdon Automotive's DNA, shaping how the company developed talent and treated workers for generations to come. That was legacy enough, not fame or recognition, but the knowledge that he had made things genuinely better, that people's working lives would be more dignified because of choices he had made, that capability would be recognized and developed because he had demonstrated its importance. As he pulled into his driveway and turned off the engine, Samuel sat quietly for a moment, feeling the weight of 46 years of labor settling into memory, feeling the freedom of retirement opening before him like unexplored country. Tomorrow would bring new routines, new rhythms, new purposes to discover. But tonight, he was simply Samuel Reed, husband to a woman he still missed, father to a daughter who made him proud, craftsman who had built an engine that had carried him through decades, worker who had finally been seen for who he truly was. And that, he thought as he climbed out of his beloved Impala and walked toward his quiet house, that was more than enough.